In the fog-choked shadows of Victorian London, a chilling mystery unfolds. Dr. Elias Starling, a brilliant astronomer, vanishes from Greenwich Observatory, leaving behind a telescope fixed on a distant galaxy and a cryptic note. The stars align at midnight. What secret was he chasing in the cosmos? Was he kidnapped, or did he flee from a truth too dangerous to reveal? Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson plunge into a web of ciphers, secret societies, and a glowing meteorite that could reshape the world or destroy it. Each clue pulls them deeper into a conspiracy where the stakes are as vast as the universe itself. Will Holmes unravel the mystery before the star's secrets claim more lives? Chapter 1. The Empty Observatory. Fog clung to London like a conspirator, shrouding the cobbled streets in a damp, gray veil as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson rattled through the city in a hansom cab. The year was 1892, and the chill of late autumn seeped through the cab's thin walls, though Holmes, as ever, seemed impervious to discomfort. His sharp eyes, glinting like polished steel, were fixed on a folded letter in his hand, its edges worn from repeated handling. Watson, seated opposite, adjusted his scarf and glanced at his friend, noting the faint crease of concentration on his brow. "Holmes," Watson ventured, breaking the silence, "you've read that letter at least a dozen times since we left Baker Street. Care to enlighten me on what has you so engrossed?" Holmes's lips twitched into a half-smile, though his gaze remained on the paper. "Patience, Watson. The details will reveal themselves in due course. For now, suffice it to say that we are bound for Greenwich Observatory, where a matter of some urgency awaits." Watson raised an eyebrow. "Greenwich? At this hour? It's nearly 10 o'clock, and the fog's thick enough to choke a horse. What could be so pressing at an observatory?" Holmes folded the letter and tucked it into his coat pocket. The disappearance of Dr. Elias Starling, one of England's foremost astronomers. He vanished from his post last night, leaving behind a telescope trained on a peculiar star cluster, and a note that raises more questions than it answers. Watson frowned, his curiosity piqued. "Vanished? As in kidnapped, or nothing, Watson," Holmes interrupted, his tone brisk. "Speculation without data is a cardinal sign. We shall see what the scene itself tells us." The cab slowed as it approached the Thames, the air growing heavier with the scent of river mud and coal smoke. Through the fog, the silhouette of the Greenwich Observatory loomed, its domed roof a faint curve against the murky sky. The driver halted, and Holmes leapt out with his usual feline grace, Watson following at a more measured pace. A young constable, his face pale under his helmet, stood waiting at the observatory's iron gate. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," the constable said, touching his helmet in salute. "Inspector Lestrade's inside. He said to bring you straight up." Holmes nodded curtly and strode through the gate, his long coat billowing in the damp air. Watson followed, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The observatory's grounds were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of scholars and assistants replaced by an oppressive stillness. The fog seemed to swallow sound itself, leaving only the faint creak of the gate behind them. Inside, the observatory was a cavernous space of polished wood and gleaming brass. The great telescope, a towering instrument of iron and glass, dominated the central chamber, its lens pointed upward through the open slit in the dome. The air smelled of oil and old books, and the faint tick of a clock echoed from a corner. Inspector Lestrade, his wiry frame dwarfed by the telescope, stood beside a cluttered desk, his expression a mix of frustration and relief as he spotted Holmes. "About time you got here, Holmes," Lestrade said, his voice tinged with the weariness of a long night. "This business is a proper puzzle, and I'll be damned if I can make heads or tails of it." Holmes's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a camera. "Then let us begin with the facts, Inspector. What do we know of Dr. Starling's disappearance?" Lestrade gestured to the desk where papers lay scattered like leaves after a storm. Starling was here last night, working late as usual. Around midnight, his assistant, a lad named Harrow, went to fetch him a cup of tea. When he returned, Starling was gone. No sign of a struggle, no witnesses, nothing, just this. He handed Holmes a small slip of paper. Holmes held it to the light, his fingers tracing the edges. The note was written in a hurried hand, the ink slightly smudged. The stars align at midnight. Watson leaned over to read it, his brow furrowing. Sounds like something out of a penny dreadful, Watson remarked. What does it mean? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He sniffed the paper, then held it closer to the gas lamp on the desk. The ink is fresh, less than 24 hours old. The paper is of high quality, likely from Starling's own stock. The handwriting, however, is not his. Lestrade's eyes widened. Not his? How can you tell? Holmes pointed to a stack of notebooks on the desk. Compare the note to Starling's log entries. His script is meticulous, with a distinct flourish on the Guy and Y. This note lacks those characteristics. Someone else wrote it, possibly to mislead us. Watson glanced at the notebooks, then back at Holmes. So someone was here. With him? A colleague, perhaps. Possibly, Holmes murmured, his attention shifting to the telescope. He climbed the small ladder to its eyepiece and peered through, adjusting the focus with practiced ease. Curious. The telescope is trained on the Andromeda constellation, specifically a cluster known as M31. An unusual choice for routine observation. Lestrade scratched his head. What's so special about it? Holmes descended, his expression thoughtful. M31 is a galaxy, not a star cluster, though it was once thought to be a nebula. Starling's recent publication suggests he was studying its structure, hypothesizing about its distance from Earth. To fix the telescope on it so precisely suggests he was observing something specific. Something he deemed urgent. Watson gestured to the scattered papers. Perhaps his notes will tell us what. Holmes began sorting through the papers, his hands moving with the dexterity of a pianist. Most were filled with mathematical equations and star charts, but one sheet caught his eye, a detailed drawing of M31, annotated with a series of numbers and symbols. At its center was a faint sketch of a star, circled in red ink. This, Holmes said, holding up the chart, is no ordinary observation. The numbers correspond to a cipher, one I've encountered before in cryptographic societies. It's a substitution code using stellar coordinates as the key. Watson blinked. A cipher? Why would an astronomer hide his work in code? Holmes's eyes gleamed. To protect it, Watson. Or to conceal it from those who might misuse it. Lestrade groaned. You're saying Starling was mixed up in something shady? The man's a scholar, not a spy. Holmes ignored him, his focus on the chart. He produced a pencil and began jotting notes in the margin, muttering to himself as he worked. After several minutes, he straightened, a spark of triumph in his eyes. The cipher points to a location, he said. A manor in Dartmoor, near 2 bridges. The coordinates are precise, down to the minute of latitude and longitude. Watson frowned. Dartmoor? That's a far cry from Greenwich. Why would Starling or whoever wrote this point us there? Holmes tucked the chart into his pocket. That, Watson, is what we shall discover. Inspector, I trust you'll secure the observatory until we return. No one is to touch this telescope or these papers. Lestrade nodded grudgingly. Fine, but you'd better have something to show for it, Holmes. The yard's breathing down my neck on this one. As they stepped back into the fog, Watson felt a familiar thrill, the sense that they were on the cusp of unraveling a mystery that was both intricate and perilous. The cab ride to Baker Street was silent. Holmes lost in thought, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on his knee. Watson, too, was preoccupied, his mind turning over the details. The empty observatory, the cryptic note, the cipher hidden in a star chart. It was a puzzle worthy of Holmes's genius, and Watson knew they were only at the beginning. Back at 221B, Holmes spread the star chart on the table, its edges curling under the weight of his scrutiny. Mrs. Hudson brought tea, her usual disapproval, softened by curiosity as she lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Out with it, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes said without looking up. "You've heard something." She sniffed, setting the tray down with a clink. Only that Dr. Starling was a queer sort, always talking about stars as if they were alive. "My cousin's boy works at the observatory, you know. Says Starling was there every night, muttering about a cosmic key." Holmes's head snapped up. "A cosmic key? Did he elaborate?" Mrs. Hudson shook her head. "Not a word more. Just thought it odd, that's all." As she left, Watson leaned forward. "A cosmic key, Holmes. Sounds like something from one of those scientific romances." "Or a metaphor for something tangible," Holmes replied. He returned to the chart, his pencil tracing the cipher's coordinates. "The manor in Dartmoor is our next step. Starling, or someone acting in his stead, wants us to follow this trail. The question is why." The next morning, they boarded a train to Devon, the fog giving way to rolling hills and windswept moors. The journey was long, and Watson spent it reading Starling's latest paper, published in the Royal Astronomical Society's journal. It detailed his theory that M31 was not a nebula, but a vast collection of stars, a galaxy far beyond the Milky Way. The idea was revolutionary, and Watson couldn't help but wonder if it had drawn dangerous attention. "Holmes," he said as the train rattled through a tunnel, "do you think Starling's work made him a target? His theories are bold, to say the least." Holmes gazed out the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. "Boldness invites envy, Watson, and envy invites enemies. But I suspect there's more at play here, something tied to that cosmic key." They arrived in Dartmoor by dusk, the moor stretching out like a dark sea under a sky pricked with stars. The manor, a crumbling pile of stone known as Grimpen Hall, stood isolated amid the heather. Its windows were dark, its gates rusted, and yet the telescope in its upper room was identical to the one in Greenwich, its lens trained on M31. Watson shivered, not entirely from the cold. "This place feels like a tomb." Holmes's eyes glinted in the moonlight. A tomb, perhaps, but one with secrets to tell. They entered the manor, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The telescope room was a mirror of the observatory, down to the scattered papers and the faint smell of oil. But on the telescope's base, Holmes found something new, a hidden compartment, its latch cunningly disguised as a screw. Inside was a fragment of a map, its edges scorched as if burned in haste. "This," Holmes said, holding the fragment to the light, "is our next clue. Starling, or someone close to him, has gone to great lengths to guide us. The question is whether we're being led to him or into a trap." As they stood in the silent manor, the stars above seemed to pulse with secrets, and Watson felt the weight of the mystery settle over him. They had cracked the first layer of the puzzle, but the path ahead was as vast and uncharted as the galaxy itself. For now, though, they had a map, a destination, and the promise of answers hidden in the night sky. Chapter 2. The cipher's clue. Train to Dartmoor rattled through the English countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the storm brewing in Sherlock Holmes's mind. The cipher from the Greenwich Observatory star chart had been child's play to crack, too simple. In fact, for a mind like his, a sequence of numbers hidden in the constellation lines, cross-referenced with a nautical almanac, had yielded coordinates 50.5872N, 3.8791W, a remote manor on the edge of Dartmoor's desolate moors. But simplicity in a cipher was a red flag. It suggested intent, a breadcrumb left for someone to follow. The question was, who? Dr. John Watson sat across from Holmes in the compartment, his notebook open, pen scratching as he recorded the morning's findings. The cryptic note, "The stars align at midnight," lay folded in his pocket, its ink still faintly pungent, as Holmes had pointed out with a sniff. Watson glanced up, catching Holmes staring out the window, his sharp profile etched against the blur of green fields. "You're brooding," Watson said, closing his notebook. "The cipher was too easy, wasn't it?" Holmes's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "You're improving, Watson." Yes, it was insultingly straightforward. A schoolboy with a penchant for puzzles could have cracked it. Which means Dr. Starling wanted it solved, or someone else did. Watson frowned, adjusting his bowler hat. "Starling? You think he left it for us? Or for someone else entirely?" Holmes replied, his gray eyes narrowing. The note's ink was fresh, the cipher embedded in a chart he was studying. Either Starling orchestrated his own disappearance, or someone is playing a game with us. I intend to find out which. The train screeched to a halt at a rural station, little more than a platform and a weathered sign reading Bovey Tracy. The air was crisp, heavy with the scent of damp earth and heather. Holmes stepped onto the platform, his long coat billowing as he scanned the horizon. Dartmoor stretched before them, a vast rolling expanse of mist and shadow, its hills jagged against the slate-gray sky. Watson shivered, pulling his coat tighter. "Charming place," he muttered. "Feels like the edge of the world." "Precisely why it's perfect for secrets," Holmes said, striding toward a waiting cart. The driver, a stooped man with a face like crumpled parchment, tipped his cap. "To Blackthorn Manor, sir?" he asked, voice rasping. Holmes nodded. "Climbing aboard. You know it then?" "Aye," the driver said, flicking the reins. "Old place, empty for years. Belonged to the Starling family once, though none's been seen there in a decade. Odd you'd be headin' there." "Odd." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, exchanging a glance with Watson. The cart trundled along a winding path, the moor unfolding around them. Gnarled trees twisted by the wind stood like sentinels, and the mist clung low, curling around granite outcrops. Watson's hand rested on the revolver in his pocket, a habit from his army days. Holmes, meanwhile, seemed almost serene, his fingers steepled as he absorbed every detail: the crunch of gravel, the distant cry of a curlew, the faint scent of peat smoke. Blackthorn Manor loomed into view as the mist parted, a hulking silhouette of weathered stone and ivy. Its windows were dark, its chimneys cold. The cart stopped at the iron gates, rusted and chained shut. Holmes leapt down, inspecting the lock. "Recently oiled," he said, running a finger along the chain. "Someone's been here, and not long ago." Watson peered through the bars. "Doesn't look like anyone's home now." "Appearances, Watson," Holmes said, producing a small tool from his pocket. With a few deft twists, the lock clicked open. "They lie more often than not." They pushed through the gates, the hinges groaning. The manor's grounds were overgrown, rose bushes choked with weeds, a fountain dry and cracked. The front door, heavy oak with a brass knocker shaped like a crescent moon, stood slightly ajar. Holmes paused, examining the threshold. "No dust disturbed," he said. "Someone's been careful." Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and old wood. The foyer was grand but neglected, a chandelier draped in cobwebs, its crystals dulled. A wide staircase spiraled upward, and a hallway stretched into shadow. Holmes's eyes darted to the floor, where faint scuff marks marred the dust. "Boots," he said. "Men's, size 9, with a distinctive heel pattern. Recent, within the last day." Watson followed as Holmes moved with purpose, his cane tapping lightly against the floorboards. They entered a library, its shelves sagging under leather-bound tomes. A massive telescope stood by a window, its lens pointed skyward. Holmes approached it, his fingers tracing the brass. "Identical to the one at Greenwich," he said. "Trained on the same star cluster in GC 884, The Perseus double cluster. Curious. Watson peered through the eyepiece, seeing a scattering of stars like diamonds on black velvet. What's so special about this cluster? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was examining the telescope's base, his fingers probing for hidden mechanisms. Starling was no amateur. He was studying something specific, something worth vanishing for. A creak echoed from the hallway. Watson's hand went to his revolver, but Holmes raised a finger, signaling silence. They waited, the only sound the faint drip of water somewhere in the manor. After a moment, Holmes resumed his inspection, undeterred. "Help me with this," he said, gesturing to a panel on the telescope's pedestal. Together, they pried it open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a folded parchment, yellowed and brittle. Holmes unfolded it carefully, revealing a partial map, its edges torn. It depicted a section of Dartmoor, with a red X marked near a tor labeled Hound's Crest. "A map fragment," Holmes said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Starling's trail continues." Before Watson could respond, a shadow moved. In the doorway, an old man stood there, leaning on a gnarled stick, his face weathered as the moor itself. His eyes, sharp and suspicious, fixed on Holmes. "Who are you, then?" he demanded. "This ain't a place for strangers." Holmes straightened, his demeanor shifting to one of disarming charm. "My apologies, good sir. I'm Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We're investigating the disappearance of Dr. Elias Starling. You are." The man hesitated, then grunted. "Jeb Tuttle, groundskeeper. Been looking after this place since the Starlings left. Ain't seen Elias in years, not since he was a lad." "Yet you're here," Holmes said, his tone mild but probing. "And the telescope is in use. Tell me, Mr. Tuttle, what do you know of Dr. Starling's recent activities?" Tuttle's eyes flickered to the telescope, then back to Holmes. "He was here, maybe a week ago. Kept to himself, always staring at the sky. Talked of a cosmic key, whatever that means. Mad, if you ask me." "Madness and genius are close cousins," Holmes said, folding the map fragment and slipping it into his pocket. "Did he mention where he was going?" Tuttle shook his head. "Left in a hurry, he did. Said something about the moor, about finding what was written in the stars. Didn't make no sense." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. You've been most helpful." "As they left the library," Watson whispered, "do you trust him?" "Not remotely," Holmes replied. "His boots match the scuff marks, but the tread is worn differently. He's been here more often than he admits, and recently. He's hiding something." They explored the manor further, finding little else of note, a few scattered papers. A half-eaten meal in the kitchen, a coat with a torn sleeve hanging in a wardrobe. Each clue deepened the mystery, but the map fragment was their guide. As dusk fell, they stepped outside, the moor now cloaked in twilight. Holmes studied the map, his finger tracing the path to Hound's Crest. "We'll need to move quickly," he said. "The moor is treacherous at night, and I suspect we're not alone in this hunt." They set off, the ground soft beneath their boots, the air growing colder as the stars emerged. The map led them through a valley where the mist thickened, curling around their ankles like ghostly fingers. Watson's nerves were taut, his eyes scanning the shadows. Holmes, however, moved with the confidence of a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos dotted Hound's Crest, a jagged to rising. Like a broken tooth, they found a small campsite, ashes still warm, a tin cup abandoned in the grass. Holmes knelt, examining the ground. "2 sets of prints," he said. "Starlings and another smaller, lighter. A woman, perhaps, or a slight man. They were here within hours." Watson glanced around, the moor silent save for the winds. Low moan. "What's this cosmic key Tuttle mentioned?" "A metaphor? Possibly," Holmes said, standing. "Or something tangible." Starling's notes at Greenwich mentioned a source of celestial energy. The star cluster. The cipher, The map all point to something he believed worth hiding. As they searched the campsite, a faint glow caught Holmes's eye. Beneath, a rock half buried, was a small crystal, no larger than a walnut, pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light. He picked it up, turning it in his gloved hand. "Fascinating," he murmured. "It's warm to the touch, and the light irregular, like a heartbeat." Watson stared, mesmerized. "Is that the cosmic key?" "Perhaps a piece of it," Holmes said, "or a clue to its nature. Starling's disappearance is no simple abduction. He's chasing something extraordinary, and someone else wants it." The night deepened, and with it, the sense of being watched. Holmes pocketed the crystal, his expression unreadable. "We camp here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we follow the trail to its source." Watson nodded, though unease gnawed at him. As they set up a meager camp, the stars above burned brightly, their light both beautiful and ominous. Holmes sat by the fire, the crystal in his hand, his mind racing through possibilities. The cipher had led them here, but the real puzzle was only beginning to take shape. The next morning, the moor was shrouded in fog, the tor barely visible. Holmes was already awake, studying the map fragment by the dim light of dawn. Watson stirred, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Any revelations?" he asked, pouring coffee from a flask. "The map is incomplete," Holmes said, his voice clipped. "The torn edges suggest at least 2 other fragments. Starling's either scattered them deliberately, or someone else has them. Either way, hounds. Crushed is a waypoint, not the destination." They packed quickly, the crystal safely tucked in Holmes's satchel. The trail led northwest, toward a series of low hills dotted with ancient stone circles. As they walked, Holmes recounted the star cluster's significance, its unusual brightness, its position in Perseus, a constellation tied to myths of heroism and sacrifice. Watson listened, half expecting Holmes to draw a connection to their own quest. Midday brought them to a stone circle, its weathered monoliths leaning like silent giants. Holmes paused, his eyes scanning the ground. "Here," he said, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. He dug with his hands, revealing a small tin box. Inside was another map fragment, this one marked with a cave system labeled Wraiths. "Hollow. Another piece," Watson said, excitement creeping into his voice. "We're getting closer." Holmes's expression was grim. "Or being led. The simplicity of these clues troubles me. Starling's a scientist, not a treasure hunt. Enthusiast. Why make it so easy?" Before Watson could reply, a twig snapped nearby. Holmes spun, his cane raised like a weapon. A figure emerged from the fog, a young woman, her cloak mud-stained, her eyes wide with fear. She held a small dagger, her hand trembling. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. Holmes lowered his cane, his tone calm. "Sherlock Holmes and my colleague, Dr. Watson. We're seeking Dr. Elias Starling. And you are?" She hesitated, her grip tightening on the dagger. "Clara Voss. I worked with Elias. He sent me here, said I'd find answers." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Answers to what?" Clara glanced around, as if expecting pursuit. "The cosmic key. It's not just a theory, it's real. Elias found something in the stars, something that could change everything. But others want it, and they'll kill to get it." Watson stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Miss Voss, we're trying to find him. If you know where he is." "I don't," she said, her voice breaking. "He told me to hide, to protect the fragments. He said the moor holds the truth. But it's dangerous. The Order, they're watching." Holmes's interest sharpened. "The Order?" Clara clamped her mouth shut, realizing she'd said too much. Before Holmes could press further, a low whistle echoed through the fog, a signal. Clara's eyes widened in panic. "They're here," she whispered, then bolted into the mist. Holmes started after her, but Watson grabbed his arm. "Holmes, it's too dangerous. We don't know who's out there." Holmes's jaw tightened, but he nodded. She's part of this, Watson. Her fear was genuine, but so was her knowledge. The Order, whatever it is, holds the key to Starling's disappearance. They retreated to the stone circle, taking cover behind a monolith. The fog thickened, muffling sound, but Holmes's senses were razor-sharp. He heard the crunch of boots, the murmur of voices too, perhaps 3 men, moving systematically. They were searching, and not for rabbits. We're being hunted. Holmes whispered, "Stay low." They waited, the tension palpable, until the sounds faded. Holmes emerged, his expression resolute. "Wraith's Hollow is our next move. Clara Voss knows more than she let on, and I suspect she's headed there. So are we." As they set off, the moor seemed to close in around them, its secrets buried in stone and shadow. The crystal in Holmes's satchel pulsed faintly, a reminder of the stakes. Starling's trail was growing warmer, but so was the danger. The cipher had led them to Dartmoor, but the real mystery, the cosmic key, and the order that sought it, was only beginning to unravel. Chapter 3. Shadows on the moor. The wind howled across the desolate expanse of Dartmoor, carrying with it a chill that seeped into the bones. The moor stretched endlessly before Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, a vast tapestry of gnarled heather, jagged tors, and treacherous bogs that seemed to pulse with secrets. The map fragment, discovered in the hidden compartment of the telescope at the Dartmoor Manor, had led them here, to this forsaken wilderness where the sky felt closer than the earth. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon, held the fragment. Aloft, its edges frayed, but its markings precise, a constellation of inked lines pointing to a specific ridge known as Black Tor. Watson adjusted his scarf against the biting wind, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. "Holmes, are you certain this map is reliable? It could be a ruse to lure us into this godforsaken place." His voice carried a mix of skepticism and unease, the moor's oppressive silence amplifying his words. Holmes, his lean figure silhouetted against the fading twilight, didn't turn. "The map is no ruse, Watson. Its ink matches the note from the observatory, and the cipher's coordinates align with Black Tor's position. Dr. Starling left this trail deliberately. The question is why?" His tone was clipped, his mind already racing ahead. Piecing together the puzzle, they trudged onward, the map guiding them through a labyrinth of rocky outcrops and shallow streams. The air grew heavier as dusk deepened, the sky a bruised purple, streaked with clouds that seemed to claw at the stars. Watson's lantern cast a feeble glow, its light swallowed by the moor's vastness. Holmes, ever vigilant, paused occasionally to examine the ground, his fingers brushing over faint impressions in the soil, a bent blade of grass, a scuff mark on a stone. "Someone passed this way recently," he murmured, his voice low. "Light-footed, purposeful, not a wanderer." As they crested a low hill, Black Tor loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette like a sentinel guarding the moor's heart. The map indicated a narrow path winding around its base, leading to a hollow marked by a crude star symbol. Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "We're close, Watson. Stay sharp." The path descended into a shallow valley where the air grew thick with mist. The lantern's beam wavered, revealing gnarled roots and slick stones that threatened to trip them. Watson's breath came in short puffs, his military instincts on edge. "This feels like a trap, Holmes. Too quiet, too deliberate." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Your instincts are not wrong, but a trap requires intent, and intent leaves traces. Look there." He pointed to a cluster of stones, arranged in an unnatural circle, their surfaces etched with faint, spiraling symbols. Watson squinted, recognizing them as vaguely astronomical lines and curves suggesting orbits or constellations. "Starling's work?" Watson asked, crouching to inspect the stones. "Possibly," Holmes replied, his fingers tracing the etchings. These resemble the symbols on the note from the observatory, but they're older, weathered. This is no recent addition to the moor. Someone or something has been marking this place for years. A sudden rustle broke the silence, sharp and fleeting from the direction of the hollow. Watson's hand went to the revolver in his coat, his eyes darting to the shadows. Holmes raised a hand, signaling silence, his head tilted as he listened. The sound came again, a soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, then nothing. "Stay here," Holmes whispered, slipping into the mist with the grace of a panther. Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding. The moor seemed to close in around him, the mist curling like ghostly fingers. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity, until Holmes reappeared, his expression grim. In his hand was a pocket watch, its silver case glinting faintly in the lantern's light. "Our visitor was careless," he said, holding it up. The watch's face was engraved with celestial symbols, a crescent moon, a star, a spiral that mirrored the stone's etchings. "Whoever dropped this was watching us," Holmes continued, his voice low but intense. "They fled toward the hollow. We must follow, but cautiously. This watch is no trinket, it's a key too. Something larger." They pressed on, the path narrowing as it wound toward the hollow. The mist thickened, obscuring the stars above, but Holmes's focus never wavered. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for any sign of their quarry. The hollow itself was a shallow basin, ringed by low cliffs and dotted with stunted trees that twisted like skeletal hands. At its center stood a single boulder, its surface carved with the same celestial symbols as the watch. Watson's unease grew. "Holmes, this place feels wrong, like we're being watched." Holmes nodded, his gaze fixed on the boulder. "We are, but not by eyes alone." He knelt, examining the ground around the boulder, footprints fresh leading away. And here, he brushed away a layer of dirt, revealing a small iron ring embedded in the earth. With a tug, he lifted a concealed trapdoor, its hinges silent despite the damp. A narrow stone staircase descended into darkness. Watson peered into the void, his lantern barely piercing the gloom. "You're not seriously suggesting we go down there?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a mix of determination and curiosity. "Dr. Starling's trail leads here, Watson. Whatever he sought or fled from lies below. Are you with me?" Watson sighed, his resolve hardening. "Always, Holmes." The staircase spiraled downward, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The walls were rough-hewn, etched with more celestial symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the lantern's light. Watson's breath caught as they descended deeper, the weight of the earth pressing in. "This feels like a tomb," he muttered. "Not a tomb," Holmes corrected, his voice echoing softly. "A sanctuary, or a hiding place." At the bottom, the staircase opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with crude shelves. On them sat star charts, almanacs, and a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a star cluster matching the one from the observatory's telescope. Holmes seized the journal, flipping through its pages. "Starling's hand," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "He was here, documenting his observations of the star cluster. But listen to this." He read aloud the cosmic key is no myth. Its light reveals the path, but its power is perilous. I must hide it before they find me." "They?" Watson asked, his voice tense. Holmes didn't answer, his attention drawn to a faint glow emanating from the far wall. He approached, running his fingers over the stone until he found a loose panel. It slid aside, revealing a small alcove containing a fist-sized stone that pulsed with a soft, silvery light. "The meteorite," Holmes whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "Starling's cosmic key." Before Watson could respond, a shadow moved at the chamber's entrance. A cloaked figure stood there, their face obscured by a hood, but their voice was sharp and commanding. "You've found it, Mr. Holmes, but you'll not leave with it." Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes stepped forward, his demeanor calm yet steely. "And you are?" The figure laughed, a low, chilling sound. "A guardian of secrets you cannot comprehend. The meteorite is ours. Leave now, or the Moor will claim you both." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You drop this," he said, holding up the pocket watch. The figure stiffened, a moment of hesitation that Holmes seized. "You're no guardian. You're a thief, and a clumsy one. Who do you serve?" The figure lunged, a blade glinting in their hand, but Holmes was faster. He sidestepped, grabbing the figure's wrist and twisting until the blade clattered to the ground. Watson moved to assist, but the figure broke free, shoving past them and vanishing up the staircase. Holmes gave chase, Watson close behind, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. They emerged onto the moor, the mist swirling around them. The figure was a fleeting shadow, disappearing into the fog. Holmes stopped, his breath steady despite the pursuit. "They're gone for now. But they've confirmed one thing. The meteorite is the key to Starling's disappearance." Watson, panting, holstered his revolver. "What now, Holmes?" "That thing, the meteorite, it's not natural." Holmes's gaze turned to the sky, where the first stars were piercing the mist. "Not natural, perhaps, but significant. Starlings. Journal mentions a celestial event tonight, a rare alignment of the cluster he studied. We'll camp here, Watson. The Moor has more to reveal, and the stars may yet guide us." They set up a makeshift camp near the hollow, the meteorite safely stowed in Holmes's satchel. As Watson built a small fire, Holmes studied the journal, his mind racing. The celestial symbols, the meteorite, the cloaked figure, all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a conspiracy far grander than a single astronomer's disappearance. The night deepened, and the moor grew silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. Watson glanced at Holmes, his friend's face illuminated by the firelight, etched with determination. "Do you think starlings still out here, Holmes? Alive?" Holmes's eyes flickered to the stars above. "Alive and hiding. The question is from whom and why. Tonight's alignment may hold the answer. We wait, Watson. The Moor is patient, and so must we be." As the stars wheeled overhead, the first signs of the celestial event appeared, a faint shimmer in the sky, like a curtain of light rippling across the cluster. Holmes's gaze sharpened, his mind locking onto the phenomenon. The Moor, the meteorite. The symbols all were converging, and Sherlock Holmes was ready to unravel their secrets, one star at a time. Chapter 4. The celestial event. The fog over Dartmoor clung to the earth like a living thing, curling around Holmes and Watson as they trudged across the uneven terrain. The map fragment, discovered in the hidden compartment of the telescope at the deserted manor, had led them here, to a desolate stretch of moor where the stars above seemed to pulse with secrets. The night was cold, the air sharp with the scent of damp heather and something faintly metallic, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Holmes, his long coat flapping in the wind, held the map aloft, its edges frayed, but its markings clear under the beam of his lantern. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but carrying the weight of certainty, "the cipher's coordinates end here, at this precise point. Yet there's nothing but this blasted moor and the stars above. What do you make of it?" Watson, his boots sinking slightly into the soggy ground, squinted into the darkness. His military instincts, honed in the deserts of Afghanistan, prickled with unease. "It's too quiet, Holmes. No birds, no wind through the grasses. It's as if the moor itself is waiting for something." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light, a spark of excitement betraying his otherwise composed demeanor. "Precisely, my dear Watson. The moor is waiting, and so are we. The note at the observatory mentioned the stars aligning at midnight. We have less than an hour. Keep your revolver close." They set up a makeshift camp, a small fire crackling to ward off the chill. Holmes unfolded the star chart from the observatory, its edges worn from handling, and traced the constellations with a gloved finger. A cryptic note, "The stars align at midnight," had been no idle scribble. The cipher in the chart had pointed them to Dartmoor, and now, as the hour approached, Holmes's mind churned with possibilities. Was Dr. Elias Starling, the vanished astronomer, orchestrating some grand experiment? Or was he a pawn in a larger game, one that involved the strange star cluster his telescope had been fixed upon? Watson, ever practical, checked his pocket watch. 10 minutes to midnight, Holmes. If this celestial event is as significant as Starling's note suggests, we'd best be ready for anything. Holmes nodded, his gaze fixed on the sky. The stars were brilliant, unmarred by city lights, and the cluster in question, a tight knot of pinpricks known as the Hyades, seemed to shimmer with unnatural intensity. The Hyades, Holmes murmured. In Greek mythology, they were the daughters of Atlas, weeping for their brother's death. Curious that Starling would focus on them. Their position tonight is unique, a rare alignment with Aldebaran, the Eye of Taurus. If my calculations are correct, something extraordinary is about to occur. As the minutes ticked by, the air grew heavier, charged with an electric hum that set Watson's nerves on edge. He gripped his revolver, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The cloaked figure they'd encountered earlier, the one who'd dropped the pocket watch with its celestial engravings, had vanished into the fog, leaving only questions. Was it Starling himself? An ally? An enemy? The watch, now tucked in Holmes's pocket, was a tantalizing clue. Its symbols, an ancient astronomical code Holmes had yet to fully decipher. At precisely midnight, the sky seemed to shift. A faint ripple of light, like a curtain of gossamer, flickered across the Hyades. Watson gasped, his breath visible in the cold. "Holmes, look. It's as if the stars are moving." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "Not moving, Watson. Focusing. The alignment is acting as a lens, channeling light to a specific point. Stay alert. This is no mere astronomical phenomenon." As if in response to his words, a beam of pale, silvery light shot down from the Hyades, slicing through the fog like a blade. It struck the moor 100 yards ahead, illuminating a jagged outcrop of rock that had been invisible in the darkness. The light pulsed, steady as a heartbeat, and the ground beneath their feet trembled faintly. "Good Lord, Holmes!" Watson exclaimed, stumbling slightly. "What in heaven's name is that?" Holmes was already moving, his lantern abandoned as he strode toward the illuminated outcrop. "A signal, Watson. Or perhaps a key. Come, we must investigate." They reached the outcrop, a slab of granite worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The beam of starlight bathed it in an eerie glow, revealing faint carvings etched into its surface, spirals and dots that mirrored the celestial symbols on the pocket watch. Holmes traced them with his fingers, his expression one of intense concentration. "These are not natural," he said. "They're too precise, too deliberate. This rock is a marker, Watson, a guide to something hidden. The starlight is no coincidence, it's revealing what's meant to be seen." Watson, his revolver still in hand, scanned the surrounding moor. The fog had parted slightly, but the darkness beyond the beam was impenetrable. "Holmes, if this is a marker, what's it marking?" "There's nothing here but rock and heather." Holmes's lips twitched in a rare smile. "Patience, my friend. The earth keeps its secrets well, but it yields to those who know where to look." He knelt, examining the base of the outcrop where the beam seemed to pool, as if drawn to a specific point. His fingers brushed the soil, and he paused, feeling a slight indentation. With a swift motion, he scraped away the dirt, revealing a metal plate embedded in the ground. It was circular, no larger than a dinner plate, and engraved with the same celestial symbols. At its center was a small star-shaped depression, as if designed to hold something. "A lock," Holmes said, his voice tinged with triumph. "Or a keyhole. The starlight is the trigger, and this plate is the gate. But what does it open?" Before Watson could respond, the ground shuddered again, stronger this time. A low grinding sound echoed through the moor, and the outcrop shifted, revealing a narrow crevice just wide enough for a man to slip through. The beam of starlight poured into it, illuminating a rough-hewn staircase descending into the earth. Watson stared, his heart pounding. "A cave, Holmes? Hidden by a rock in the middle of Dartmoor? This is madness." "Madness, perhaps," Holmes replied, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery, but calculated madness. Starling knew of this place. The cipher, the map, the note all lead here. "Come, Watson, we're close to unraveling this mystery." They descended the staircase, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The starlight followed them, its beam impossibly persistent, as if guided by some unseen force. The walls of the passage were carved with more symbols, their edges softened by time but still legible. Holmes ran his fingers along them, muttering to himself as he pieced together their meaning. "These are older than the manor," he said. "Older than Greenwich, even. This place predates modern astronomy, perhaps by centuries. The symbols suggest a knowledge of the stars that rivals our own." At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow. The starlight illuminated a stone pedestal at the center, upon which rested a leather-bound journal and a small, irregularly shaped object that pulsed with a faint greenish glow. Watson's breath caught in his throat. "Is that a meteorite?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Holmes approached the pedestal, his movements cautious but deliberate. He picked up the journal, its pages yellowed but intact, and flipped it open. The handwriting was unmistakable Dr. Elias Starling's, the same as the cryptic note from the observatory. Holmes scanned the pages, his eyes darting over the dense script. "Starling's journal," he said. "He writes of discovering this meteorite during an expedition to the Arctic. Its composition is unlike anything known to science, capable of absorbing and emitting energy in ways that defy our understanding." He believed it to be the cosmic key the groundskeeper mentioned, a relic of extraterrestrial origin with the potential to unlock new realms of knowledge. Watson stared at the glowing meteorite, its light casting strange shadows on the cavern walls. But why hide it here, and why disappear? Holmes's brow furrowed as he read further. Starling feared his discovery had attracted dangerous attention. He writes of a group, those who seek to harness the stars, who believe the meteorite's energy could be weaponized. He hid it here, in this ancient chamber, to keep it from their hands. But look, Watson, footprints. He pointed to the cavern floor, where a trail of muddy prints led from the pedestal to a narrow tunnel branching off into the darkness. The prints were fresh, no older than a day, and accompanied by scuff marks, as if something heavy had been dragged. "Someone else has been here," Watson said, gripping his revolver tighter. "Starling or his pursuers?" Holmes knelt, examining the prints. "Two sets, one Starling's, I'd wager, based on the size and tread of his boots from the observatory. The other is larger, heavier, with a distinctive heel. Someone followed him. We must proceed with caution." They followed the tunnel, the starlight dimming as they ventured deeper. The air grew thick with the scent of minerals and something acrid, like burnt metal. The tunnel twisted and turned, its walls narrowing until Holmes and Watson had to move single file. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint drip of water and the echo of their footsteps. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller but no less remarkable. The walls were lined with crude shelves, each holding artifacts that gleamed faintly in the dark metallic fragments, polished stones, and what appeared to be ancient tools, all etched with the same celestial symbols. At the center of the chamber stood a wooden crate, its lid pried open to reveal a collection of scientific instruments. a sextant, a galvanometer, and a peculiar device that looked like a cross between a telescope and a dynamo. Holmes's eyes lit up. Starling's laboratory, he said. He wasn't just hiding the meteorite, he was studying it. These instruments are designed to measure energy, not just light. He was trying to understand the meteorite's properties. Watson picked up the galvanometer, its needle twitching faintly. Holmes, this is still active. Something's powering it. Holmes followed the device's wires, which snaked along the floor to a small metallic box embedded in the wall. He opened it, revealing a shard of the meteorite, no larger than a walnut, glowing with the same greenish light. The wires were connected to it, and a faint hum emanated from the setup. A power source, Holmes said, his voice tinged with awe. Starling was harnessing the meteorite's energy. This could explain the Society's interest. If they've learned of this, they'd stop at nothing to possess it. Before Watson could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of the chamber. Holmes spun, his lantern casting a beam into the darkness. A figure stood there, cloaked and hooded, the same one they'd glimpsed on the moor. The figure froze, then bolted down another tunnel, their footsteps echoing. After them! Holmes shouted, already in pursuit. Watson followed, his heart pounding as they raced through the twisting passages. The figure was fast, but Holmes was relentless, his long strides eating up the distance. The chase led them upward, the air growing fresher as they neared the surface. The tunnel ended abruptly at a wooden door, its surface carved with more celestial symbols. Holmes pushed it open, revealing the moor once more, bathed in the fading glow of the starlight beam. The figure was gone, vanished into the fog, but they'd left something behind, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush. Holmes plucked it free, examining it closely. Silk, he said. Expensive, tailored. Our quarry is no common thug. This is someone of means, perhaps a member of the Society, Starling feared. Watson caught his breath, his revolver still drawn. Holmes, were in over our heads. A secret chamber, a glowing meteorite, a Society chasing it. This is no ordinary case. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. No, Watson, it's extraordinary. And we're closer than ever to finding Starling. The footprints, the journal, the instruments, they all point to a man desperate to protect his discovery. We must follow the trail, wherever it leads. As they prepared to return to the cavern, the starlight beam flickered and died, leaving the moor in darkness once more. The celestial event was over, but its revelation had changed everything. Holmes tucked the journal under his arm, the meteorite's glow still vivid in his mind. Whatever Starling had uncovered, it was more than a scientific curiosity. It was a force that could reshape the world. For better or worse, they made their way back to the cavern, the weight of their discovery settling over them. The meteorite, the instruments, the footprints, all were pieces of a puzzle that Holmes was determined to solve. As they descended once more into the earth, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the shadows on the moor held eyes that followed their every move. Holmes, he said quietly, do you think Starling's still alive? Holmes paused, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I do, Watson. A man who could orchestrate such an elaborate hiding place, who could leave a trail this intricate, is not so easily dispatched. He's out there, and we'll find him before the Society does. The chapter closed with the two men standing in the cavern, the meteorite's faint glow casting their shadows against the ancient walls. The trail was clear, the stakes higher than ever. Whatever lay ahead, Holmes knew one thing: the mystery of the vanishing astronomer was far from over, and the stars themselves seemed to whisper that the truth was only beginning to emerge. Chapter 5. The Secret Society. The air in the Dartmoor cave was thick with damp and the faint, metallic tang of the meteorite's glow. Sherlock Holmes crouched near the cavern's mouth, his silhouette sharp against the flickering torchlight. Dr. John Watson stood a step behind, his revolver drawn but lowered, his breath shallow as he scanned the jagged shadows. The beam of celestial light from the rare alignment had revealed the entrance only moments ago, and now, as the star's radiance faded, the cave seemed to pulse with secrets. Footprints fresh, deliberate, and varied in size trailed deeper into the darkness, beckoning them forward like a siren's call. Holmes's eyes, glinting with predatory focus, traced the prints. 3 distinct sets, he murmured, his voice low but resonant in the cavern's echo. One is Starling's narrow, precise, with a slight drag on the left heel. The others, heavier, less disciplined. We're not alone, Watson. Watson tightened his grip on the revolver, his heart thudding. A trap? Possibly, Holmes replied, rising smoothly. But traps are only effective if the prey is careless. Stay sharp. They descended, the torch casting long wavering shadows on the craggy walls. The footprints led to a narrow passage where the air grew colder, and a faint hum almost imperceptible, like the vibration of a tuning fork buzzed in their ears. Watson's skin prickled. What is that sound? He whispered. Holmes tilted, his head listening. Resonance. Likely from the meteorite Starling described. Its properties are unusual, to say the least. He pressed forward, his movements silent, deliberate, like a panther stalking through underbrush. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a rough-hewn stone altar, and atop it, the meteorite, a jagged, fist-sized lump of dark rock veined with luminescent green. The glow pulsed faintly, casting an eerie light on the surrounding walls, which were etched with intricate carvings, constellations, spirals, and symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. Around the altar, cloaked figures moved, in a slow, ritualistic circle, their faces obscured by deep hoods. Their chants, low and guttural, wove a hypnotic rhythm that made Watson's head swim. Holmes's hand shot out, gripping Watson's arm. Quiet, he breathed, pulling them behind a stalagmite. The Order of the Celestial Veil. Watson's eyes widened. You know them? I've heard whispers, Holmes said, his voice barely audible. A clandestine group, obsessed with celestial phenomena. They believe the heavens hold power literal, not metaphorical. That meteorite is their grail. Watson peered at the figures, counting 10, their robes black as midnight, adorned with silver embroidery mimicking star patterns. One figure, taller than the rest, stood at the altar, arms raised, holding a curved dagger that gleamed with an unnatural sheen. The chants grew louder, and the meteorite's glow intensified, its hum now a tangible vibration that rattled Watson's teeth. They're performing a ritual, Holmes whispered. But for what purpose? Starling's journal mentioned the meteorite's energy. If they've harnessed it. He trailed off, his mind racing. Watson's gaze flicked to the footprints, now lost in the chamber's dirt floor. Starling was here. Where is he now? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Alive, I wager. The Order would need his expertise. He's no mere victim, he's a key. He scanned the chamber, his gaze locking onto a shadowed alcove where a figure stood apart, not chanting, but observing. The figure's posture was tense, hands clasped tightly, as if wrestling with indecision. There, Holmes said, nodding. Toward the alcove. That's our man, or at least our lead. Watson frowned. How do you know? The others move with purpose, synchronized, that one hesitates. Guilt, perhaps, or doubt. Either way, it's a crack in their armor. Holmes slipped from their hiding spot, motioning for Watson to follow. They moved like ghosts, skirting the chamber's edge, the chants masking their footsteps. The lone figure in the alcove didn't notice their approach until Holmes was nearly upon them. With a swift motion, Holmes seized the figure's wrist, twisting it gently but firmly to prevent a cry. Speak softly, Holmes said, his voice calm but laced with steel, or this will become far less pleasant. The figure, a young woman, her face pale beneath the hood, gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't want this." Watson, revolver still in hand, stepped closer, his expression softening. "Who are you? Where's Dr. Starling?" The woman's eyes darted toward the altar, then back to Holmes. "My name is Clara. Clara Vane. I was his assistant. Elias Dr. Starling, he's alive, but they've taken him deeper, to the inner sanctum." Holmes released her wrist but kept his gaze locked on hers. "Why should we trust you, Miss Vane? You're one of them." Clara shook her head frantically. "I joined to learn, to study the stars. I didn't know, not until tonight. They want to use the meteorite's energy. They think it's a weapon, a way to control everything." Watson's jaw tightened. "Control what?" "Power," Clara said, her voice trembling. "They believe it can amplify energy, bend it to their will." Elias tried to stop them. He said it's unstable, dangerous. They locked him away when he refused to help. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "And you, Miss Vane? Why the sudden crisis of conscience?" Clara swallowed hard. "I saw what they did to him. He was my mentor. I owe him everything. Please, I'll help you find him, but we must hurry. The ritual is nearly complete." Holmes studied her for a moment, his mind dissecting her words, her posture, the faint tremor in her hands. "Very well," he said at last, "but betray us, and you'll regret it. Lead the way." Clara nodded, pulling her hood lower, and gestured toward a narrow tunnel branching from the chamber. The trio moved swiftly, the chants fading behind them as the tunnel descended deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. Watson's torch flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to dance with menace. "Tell me about the Order," Holmes said as they moved, his voice low but commanding. "Their numbers, their leaders, their plan." Clara glanced back, her face half lit by the torch. "They're small but powerful. Maybe 50 numbers, scattered across England. The leader here is Brother Cashin. He's the one with the dagger. He answers to someone higher, but I don't know who. They've been studying the meteorite for years, ever since Elias found it in Greenland. They think it's alive in a way. Its energy reacts to celestial alignments, like tonight's." Watson frowned. "Alive? That's madness." "Is it?" Holmes interjected, his tone sharp. "The meteorite's properties defy conventional science. Starling's journal mentioned electromagnetic anomalies, vibrations that mimic biological rhythms. Madness, perhaps, but grounded in observation." The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, this one lined with iron bars forming a crude cell. Inside, a figure slumped against the wall. Dr. Elias Starling, his clothes torn, his face haggard but alert. His eyes widened as he saw Clara, then narrowed at Holmes and Watson. "Clara?" Starling rasped, staggering to his feet. "You've brought strangers?" "They're here to help," Clara said quickly. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is Dr. Starling." Holmes stepped forward, inspecting the lock on the cell. "Dr. Starling, your disappearance has caused quite a stir. We've come to rectify that, but first, I need answers. What does the Order plan to do with the meteorite?" Starling's gaze flicked to Clara, then back to Holmes. "They're fools," he spat. "The meteorite's energy is unlike anything we've studied. It amplifies electromagnetic fields, but it's unstable. One miscalculation, and it could level a city. They want to demonstrate its power at a symposium in London, to prove their dominance. They think they can control it." Watson's eyes widened. "A weapon like that in the wrong hands." "Precisely," Holmes said, producing a small lockpick from his coat. "Which is why we're leaving, now." He set to work on the lock, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Clara glanced nervously back toward the tunnel. "They'll notice I'm gone soon. The ritual's almost done. When it is, they'll come for Elias." "Then we move quickly," Holmes said, the lock clicking open. Starling stumbled out, leaning on Watson for support. Miss Vane, you're with us. Betrayal is still a possibility, and I'd rather keep you where I can see you." Clara nodded, her face pale but resolute. They retraced their steps, the hum of the meteorite growing louder as they neared the main chamber. The chants had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Holmes held up a hand, signaling a halt. He peered around the corner, his expression darkening. Cloaked figures were dispersing, but Brother Cashin stood at the altar, the meteorite now encased in a strange, crystalline device that pulsed with green light. 2 guards flanked him, their hands on curved blades. "We can't fight our way through," Watson whispered. "There's too many." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then we don't fight. We infiltrate." He turned to Clara. "Your robes, can you get us 2 more?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "There's a storage alcove nearby. But you'll need to blend in. The order is strict about protocol." "Leave that to me," Holmes said. He glanced at Watson. "Ready to play a part, old friend?" Watson sighed, holstering his revolver. "I suppose I've done stranger things." Minutes later, clad in borrowed robes, Holmes and Watson followed Clara into the chamber, their hoods pulled low. Starling, still weak, stayed hidden in the tunnel, guarded by Watson's stern instructions to stay put. The air was thick with tension as the remaining members of the order gathered around Cashin, who was speaking in a low, fervent tone. "The time is near," Cashin intoned, his voice carrying a zealot's fire. "The celestial veil will rise, and the world will kneel before the power of the stars. The symposium will be our stage, our triumph." Holmes, blending seamlessly into the crowd, tilted his head toward Clara. "The device," he whispered. "What does it do?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "It channels the meteorite's energy. They've been testing it in secret small bursts, enough to disrupt telegraph lines, even machinery. But tonight, they plan a full demonstration. If it works." "It won't," Holmes said, his tone resolute. He scanned the room, noting the guards' positions, the device's structure, the exits. His mind was a machine, calculating angles, probabilities, risks. Watson, less comfortable in his disguise, shifted uneasily. "Holmes, we're surrounded." "If they spot us." "They won't," Holmes said. "Not yet." He edged closer to the altar, his movements fluid, unnoticeable. Clara followed, her hands trembling beneath her robes. Cashin raised the dagger, its blade catching the meteorite's glow. "Brothers and sisters, the stars have spoken. We are chosen. Bring the prisoner." Holmes froze. They were coming for Starling. He exchanged a glance with Watson, who nodded, his hand inching toward the revolver hidden beneath his robe. Clara's breath hitched, her eyes wide with panic. "Stay calm," Holmes whispered. "We need the ledger, the one Cashin carries. It'll have their plans, their network. Get me close." Clara nodded, guiding them through the crowd as the guards moved toward the tunnel. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together a plan. The ledger was tucked into Cashin's robe, visible as he turned. A distraction was needed, something to draw attention without breaking their cover. Watson, reading Holmes's intent, coughed loudly, stumbling into a nearby member. "Apologies," he muttered, his voice rough, drawing eyes. The member shoved him back, and a murmur of irritation rippled through the crowd. In that moment, Holmes moved. His hand darted out, swift as a viper, slipping the ledger from Cashin's robe. The leader didn't notice, his attention fixed on the tunnel where the guards were returning, without Starling. "Where is he?" Cashin barked, his voice sharp with fury. Holmes slipped the ledger into his own robe, backing away as the crowd's attention shifted. Clara tugged at his sleeve. "They'll search the chamber." "We need to go now." Watson, recovering from his staged stumble, rejoined them. "Starling's still in the tunnel. If they find him—" "They won't," Holmes said. "But we're not leaving empty-handed." He glanced at the crystalline device, its glow now almost blinding. "That device is the key. If we can't destroy it, We take its secrets." The guards' shouts echoed from the tunnel Starling had been found. The chamber erupted into chaos, members scattering, Cashin barking orders. Holmes seized the moment, pulling Clara and Watson toward a side exit. But a guard spotted them, his blade flashing as he lunged. Watson reacted first, tackling the guard with a grunt, his revolver clattering to the ground. Holmes, with a flick of his wrist, produced a small knife and cut the guard's belt, sending his blade skittering across the floor. Clara, trembling but resolute, kicked the guard's legs out, and the trio bolted for the exit. They burst into the tunnel, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Starling was ahead, staggering but moving, his face pale in the torchlight. "They're coming," he gasped. "Keep moving." Holmes snapped, clutching the ledger. The tunnel twisted upward, the air growing fresher as they neared the surface. Behind them, the order's shouts grew louder, the hum of the meteorite a relentless pulse in their ears. They emerged into the foggy Dartmoor night, the stars hidden once more. Holmes paused, catching his breath, the ledger heavy in his hand. "We have what we need," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The order's secrets are ours, but this is far from over." Watson, panting, glanced back at the cave. "What now, Holmes?" Holmes's eyes glinted in the dark. "We return to London. The symposium is their stage, and will be there to bring down the curtain." Clara, still shaken, clutched her robe. "Elias, will he be safe?" Starling, leaning against a rock, met her gaze. "As safe as any of us, Clara, thanks to them." Holmes turned, his silhouette stark against the moor. "The stars may align, but they don't dictate our fate. Come, Watson. We have a ledger to decipher and a society to dismantle." As they vanished into the fog, the meteorite's hum faded, but its threat lingered, a silent promise of the battle to come. Chapter 6. The Ledger's Secrets. The fog clung to London streets like a conspirator, shrouding the gaslit alleys in a veil of secrecy as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson hurried through the labyrinthine heart of the city. The ledger, pilfered from the underground chamber of the Order of the Celestial Veil, lay heavy in Holmes's satchel, its leather cover worn but its pages brimming with cryptic promise. The air was sharp with the scent of coal smoke and damp cobblestones, and the distant clatter of a hansom cab echoed as they approached 221B Baker Street. The hour was late, the world asleep, but Holmes's mind burned with a restless fire, each flicker of thought illuminating the puzzle of Dr. Elias Starling's disappearance. Inside their lodgings, the fire crackled in the grate, casting long shadows across the cluttered room. Books spilled from shelves, chemical apparatus glinted in the corner, and the faint aroma of Holmes's pipe tobacco lingered. Watson, still shaken from their narrow escape from the Order's subterranean lair, set about brewing tea, his hands steadying with the familiar ritual. Holmes, however, wasted no time. He flung the ledger onto the table, its pages splaying open like a confession. "This," Holmes declared, his voice low but electric, "is the key to Starling's fate. The Order's secrets are here, Watson, encoded in their arrogance." His long fingers traced the inked lines, his eyes darting with predatory focus. "But it will not yield easily. The society is meticulous, and their cipher is no amateur scrawl." Watson set a steaming cup beside him, peering over his shoulder. The ledger's pages were a labyrinth of numbers, symbols, and abbreviated names interspersed with diagrams of celestial bodies and mechanical contraptions. "It's gibberish to me," Watson admitted, his brow furrowing. "How do you propose to unravel it?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Patience, my dear Watson. The mind of a secret society is like a locked room complex, but not impenetrable. The cipher is polybious, layered with a substitution code based on astronomical constellations. Observe the recurring symbol here." He pointed to a star-shaped glyph. "It's Orion, a reference point. The numbers beside it shift in a pattern, tied to the constellation's brightest stars. Watson leaned closer, marveling at the precision of Holmes's deduction. "And you can read this?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, his tone almost gleeful. "But I shall. Fetch my star charts and the cryptographic tables from the shelf, will you?" As Watson complied, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward like a question mark. For hours they worked in tandem, Holmes scribbling furiously, cross-referencing star positions with the ledger's numbers, while Watson organized the charts and kept the tea flowing. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. At last Holmes leaned back, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "The cipher yields," he said, tapping the page. "The ledger details the order's membership, their meeting places, and most crucially, a planned demonstration of their meteorite's power. They intend to unveil it at the Royal Scientific Symposium in 3 days' time, at the Crystal Palace." Watson's eyes widened. "A public demonstration? That's madness. If Starling's journal is correct, that meteorite's energy is unstable. It could endanger hundreds." "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice grim, "which is why Starling fled." He knew the Order's ambition outstripped their caution. "But there's more." He flipped to another page, revealing a list of names, each paired with a code name drawn from mythology. The Order's inner circle. And here, his finger stabbed at a name. Professor Mortimer, codename Arcturus. Watson's breath caught. "Mortimer? The astronomer? I know him. He lectured at the university years ago, a brilliant man, but cold, ambitious. He and Starling were rivals, always vying for grants and recognition." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A rival with motive. If Mortimer is Arcturus, he may have orchestrated Starling's disappearance to silence a threat to the Order's plans. We must confront him, but not yet. First, we need evidence tying him to the ledger's claims." Watson nodded, though unease gnawed at him. "Where do we begin? His residence?" "Tomorrow," Holmes said, rising. "For now, rest. The game is afoot, and we must be sharp." The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a canvas of brooding clouds. Holmes and Watson took a cab to Bloomsbury, where Professor Mortimer's townhouse stood, an imposing structure of red brick and ivy. The street was quiet, save for the clop of hooves and the distant cry of a newsboy. Holmes's eyes scanned the windows, noting the drawn curtains and the faint glow of a lamp within. "Someone is home," he murmured, "and awake early, curious." They knocked, and after a tense pause, the door creaked open to reveal a gaunt servant with suspicious eyes. "The professor is not receiving visitors," he said curtly. Holmes's smile was disarming. "Please inform Professor Mortimer that Sherlock Holmes seeks a brief audience regarding a matter of scientific urgency. He will not refuse." The servant hesitated, then vanished inside. Moments later, he returned, ushering them into a study that smelled of old books and wax. Professor Mortimer stood behind a cluttered desk, his thin frame rigid, his eyes sharp behind spectacles. He was a man in his 50s, with a hawkish nose and a mane of silver hair, his demeanor a blend of scholarly arrogance and barely concealed nerves. "Mr. Holmes," Mortimer said, his voice clipped. "And Dr. Watson, to what? Do I owe this intrusion?" Holmes wasted no time. "We are investigating the disappearance of Dr. Elias Starling. Your name has surfaced in connection with certain clandestine activities." Mortimer's face paled, but he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Preposterous. Starling and I were colleagues, nothing more. His disappearance is tragic, but I know nothing of it." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Then you will not mind if we examine your correspondence, or perhaps your recent travels to Dartmoor." Mortimer's hand twitched, knocking a pen to the floor. "Dartmoor? I've not been there in years." "A lie," Holmes said softly, stepping closer. "Your boots, Professor. The mud caked on the solas is rich with Dartmoor's red clay. distinct from London soil. You were there recently, perhaps at a certain manor? Mortimer's composure cracked, his eyes darting to the door. Watson, sensing the shift, positioned himself to block the exit. You're involved with the Order of the Celestial Veil, Holmes continued, his voice ablade. And you know where Starling is. I don't know what you mean, Mortimer stammered, but his hands betrayed him. Clutching the desk's edge, Holmes circled the room, his eyes scanning every detail, the star charts pinned to the walls, the telescope by the window, the stack of letters half hidden beneath a journal. Watson, secure those letters, he said, his tone casual but commanding. Watson moved swiftly, retrieving the pile before Mortimer could protest. The professor lunged forward, but Holmes blocked him with a raised hand. Careful, Professor. Your agitation suggests guilt. The letters were a goldmine. Several bore the Order's celestial seal, and one, penned in a hurried script, mentioned a demonstration and a warehouse by the docks. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he read aloud. Arcturus ensures the device is ready. The symposium will be our triumph. Mortimer sank into his chair, defeated. You don't understand, he whispered. The Order, they're unstoppable. Starling was a fool to defy them. I only did what I was told. Did you lure him to Dartmoor? Holmes pressed. Did you arrange his abduction? Mortimer nodded, his voice barely audible. I sent him to the manor, yes. But I swear, I don't know what happened after. They took him somewhere. Where? Watson demanded, his military bearing surfacing. I don't know, Mortimer cried. They don't tell me everything. I'm just a pawn. Holmes's expression was unreadable. A pawn who knows of a warehouse. You will tell us its location, or I shall ensure Scotland Yard knows of your treachery. Mortimer's shoulders slumped. It's by the Thames near Blackfriars, but you're walking into a trap. The Order protects its secrets. Then we shall spring it, Holmes said, his voice cold. Watson, we depart at once. The docks were a world apart from Bloomsbury's refinement. A maze of crates and ropes where the Thames's murky breath mingled with the stench of tar and fish. The warehouse Mortimer had named loomed ahead, its windows dark, its walls weathered by river spray. Holmes and Watson crept closer, their footsteps muffled by the fog. The ledger had hinted at equipment stored here, perhaps the key to the Order's demonstration. Holmes paused, his senses alert. Listen, he whispered. Faint hum emanated from within, like the pulse of a distant machine. He tested the door locked, but the lock was old, easily picked with his tools. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the tang of metal. Crates lined the walls, labeled with cryptic symbols that matched the ledger's code. Watson pried one open, revealing a tangle of wires and glass tubes, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. What is this? He whispered. A prototype, Holmes said, examining the device. Likely powered by the meteorite's energy. If it's unstable, as Starling feared, this could be catastrophic. Before they could investigate further, a shadow moved in the darkness. Holmes spun, his cane raised, but a figure darted past, knocking over a crate. The crash echoed, and shouts rang out. More figures emerged, cloaked and armed. The Order's enforcers. Run! Holmes barked, seizing a blueprint from the crate as Watson drew his revolver. They sprinted through the warehouse, dodging blows and overturning barrels to slow their pursuers. The hum grew louder, the air crackling with unseen energy. They burst into the fog, the blueprint clutched tightly, and vanished into the night. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the blueprint across the table, his mind racing. It depicted a device unlike any he'd seen, gears and coils designed to harness the meteorite's power. This is their weapon, he said, his voice grim, and Mortimer's our key to stopping it. Tomorrow we confront him again. He knows more than he's admitted. Watson nodded, his heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. The ledger's secrets had led them this far, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. The order was closing in, and Starling's fate hung in the balance. Chapter 7. The astronomer's rival, the London fog, clung to the cobblestones like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of newsboys hawking the morning's headlines. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in a hansom cab, the air between them thick with the scent of damp wool and the weight of unspoken questions. The events on Dartmoor, the cryptic map, the celestial symbols, the secret society had propelled them back to the city with a singular purpose: to confront Professor Nathaniel Mortimer, the man whose name had surfaced in the stolen ledger. Of the Order of the Celestial Veil, Holmes, his sharp profile half lit by the flickering gaslight outside, tapped a gloved finger against the ledger resting on his knee. "Mortimer," he murmured, his voice low but resonant with calculation. A man of science, yet entangled in a web of mysticism and ambition. His role in Starling's disappearance is no coincidence, Watson. The ledger suggests he was more than a bystander, he was a catalyst. Watson, his face set in a frown, adjusted his overcoat. But why would a respected astronomer like Mortimer involve himself with a group like the Order? He's published papers, lectured at the Royal Society. What could he gain from a meteorite and a secret society? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint, enigmatic smile. That, my dear Watson, is precisely what we shall discover. Men of intellect are not immune to greed or fear. Sometimes it is their very brilliance that makes them vulnerable to such schemes. The cab lurched too. A stop outside a stately townhouse in Bloomsbury, its facade of red brick and white trim glowing faintly under the morning's gray pallor. Mortimer's residence was a monument to academic success, ivy-clad, with tall windows that hinted at rooms filled with books and instruments. Yet, as Holmes and Watson stepped onto the pavement, the house seemed to exude a quiet unease, as if it, too, held secrets it was reluctant to share. Holmes's eyes swept over the building, noting the drawn curtains, the faint scuff marks on the doorstep, and the single gas lamp still burning despite the hour. "He's awake," Holmes observed. "And expecting company, perhaps." Watson raised an eyebrow. "Expecting us?" "Unlikely," Holmes replied, striding toward the door. "But a man with a guilty conscience is rarely at ease." A sharp rap on the door brought a housekeeper, a wiry woman with graying hair and a pinched expression. "Professor Mortimer is not receiving visitors," she said, her voice clipped. "He's indisposed." Holmes's gaze sharpened, his tone deceptively mild. "Please inform the professor that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are here on a matter of utmost urgency. I'm certain he'll find himself quite disposed to see us." The housekeeper hesitated, her eyes darting between the two men before. She retreated into the house. Moments later she returned, her expression no less guarded. "Follow me." They were led through a dimly lit hall, past walls lined with star charts and framed certificates. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and old paper, undercut by something sharper chemicals perhaps, or the tang of nervous sweat. The housekeeper ushered them into a study, where Professor Nathaniel Mortimer stood behind a cluttered desk, his posture rigid, his eyes wary. Mortimer was a man in his late 50s, tall and gaunt, with a shock of white hair and spectacles that magnified his pale blue eyes. His hands, clasped tightly before him, betrayed a tremor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice striving for calm but faltering on the edges. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Holmes did not sit, though Mortimer gestured to a pair of leather chairs. Instead, he paced slowly, his eyes roving over the room bookshelves stuffed with astronomical treatises, a telescope by the window, a half-finished manuscript strewn across the desk. "Professor Mortimer," he began, his tone measured, "we are here regarding Dr. Elias Starling. His disappearance from Greenwich Observatory has caused considerable alarm, and certain documents suggest you may have insights into his whereabouts." Mortimer's face paled, though he managed a weak laugh. "Starling?" A fine astronomer, but I hardly know him beyond professional circles. Why would you think I, Holmes raised a hand, cutting him off. Spare us the denials, Professor. Your name appears in a ledger belonging to a rather clandestine organization. The Order of the Celestial Veil, I believe. A curious affiliation for a man of your reputation. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier. Mortimer's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles whitening. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked. Betraying him. Watson, standing near the door, shifted his weight, his hand resting casually near the revolver in his coat pocket. Come now, Professor, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. We've seen the ledger. Your name is there, alongside plans involving a certain meteorite. If you know something about Starling, it's in your best interest to tell us. Mortimer's eyes darted to the window, as if contemplating escape, but Holmes stepped closer, his presence commanding. You lured Starling away from the observatory, didn't you? Holmes said, his voice low and relentless. A man of his intellect would not vanish without cause. What was it, Professor? A promise of discovery? A threat? Mortimer sank into his chair, his shoulders slumping. You don't understand, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I only meant to keep him occupied. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. Occupied? For what purpose? Mortimer hesitated, his gaze flickering to a small brass telescope on his desk, its surface engraved with faint celestial motifs. The Order, he said at last, his voice barely audible. They approached me a year ago. They spoke of a meteorite, a source of energy unlike anything known to science. They claimed it could revolutionize astronomy, power machines beyond our imagining, I thought. I thought I could steer their ambitions, use their resources for my own research. Watson's brow furrowed. And Starling? Starling was too curious, Mortimer admitted, his voice trembling. He'd been studying the same star cluster, the one tied to the meteorite. He was close to uncovering the Order's plans. They asked me to distract him, to draw him away from Greenwich. I sent him a letter, suggesting a meeting at a manor in Dartmoor. I didn't know they meant to make him disappear. Holmes's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. You claim ignorance of his fate, yet you played a part in his abduction. Where is he now, Professor? I don't know. Mortimer's voice rose, tinged with desperation. I swear it. After Dartmoor, I heard nothing more. The Order doesn't share their plans with me. I'm a tool to them, nothing more. Holmes's gaze lingered on Mortimer, assessing, dissecting. Then, without a word, he began to circle the room, his fingers trailing lightly over the desk, the bookshelves, the telescope. Watson watched, accustomed to his friend's methods but still marveling at the silent precision of his observations. Curious, Holmes murmured, pausing at a stack of papers. He lifted one, a letter bearing a wax seal with a crescent moon. This seal matches one found in the ledger. A careless oversight, Professor. He turned to Mortimer, holding the letter aloft. You've been corresponding with the Order recently, haven't you? Mortimer's face crumpled, his hands rising to cover his eyes. They threatened me, he said, his voice muffled. After Starling vanished, they said I'd be next if I didn't cooperate. They wanted my expertise for their demonstration at the symposium. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The symposium. The ledger mentioned a demonstration. What is its nature? Mortimer shook his head. I don't know the details. They spoke of showcasing the meteorite's power, proving its potential to the scientific community. I was to provide calculations, nothing more. Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, a silent agreement passing between them. The symposium was the key, the stage for the Order's ambitions. But Mortimer's evasions suggested he knew more than he admitted, or feared more than he dared say. Watson, Holmes said abruptly, search the desk. There may be more to uncover. Watson moved to the desk, rifling through papers, and drawers with practiced efficiency. Mortimer watched, his protests feeble. "You have no right. We have every right," Holmes interjected, his voice cold. "A man's life is at stake, and your complicity is evident." Watson's search yielded a small locked box, its surface etched with the same celestial symbols they'd seen on the pocket watch in Dartmoor. Holmes took it, producing a thin metal pick from his pocket. Within moments, the lock clicked open, revealing a single item, a folded telegram, its edges worn but the text intact. Holmes unfolded it, his eyes scanning the contents. "A coded message," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Sent. 2 days ago, addressed to Mortimer from an unknown source. The cipher is rudimentary child's play compared to Starling's star chart." He handed the telegram to Watson, who read it aloud. "Goods arrive at dockside, Pier 7, midnight. Ensure delivery to Symposium. Vale watches." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "Pier 7. A warehouse, no doubt, where the order stores its equipment, or perhaps the meteorite itself. This is our next move, Watson." Mortimer's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "You can't go there. The order, they're dangerous. They have men everywhere, watching, waiting." Holmes regarded him with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Then you should have considered that before aligning yourself with them, Professor. Your cooperation may yet redeem you. Tell us everything." "You know about Pier 7. Mortimer's shoulders sagged, his resistance crumbling. "It's a storage facility, leased under a false name. I overheard them mention crates of equipment, scientific instruments. They're preparing for the symposium, but I don't know what they plan to do with the meteorite. I swear, that's all I know." Holmes studied him for a long moment, then turned to Watson. "We have what we need. Let us leave the professor to his regrets for now." As they stepped back into the fog-laden street, Watson glanced at Holmes, his expression troubled. "Do you believe him? That he doesn't know Starling's fate?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Mortimer is a man caught in a trap. Of his own making, Watson. He knows more than he admits, but fear binds his tongue. The telegram is our guide. Pier 7 at midnight. We shall find answers there, or perhaps more questions." The cab rattled away, carrying them toward the Thames, and the shadowed docks where the order's secrets awaited. The mystery of Elias Starling's disappearance was far from solved, but the trail was growing warmer, and Holmes's mind was alight with the thrill of the chase. The journey to the docks was a study in contrasts, the quiet of Bloomsbury giving way to the clamor of London's industrial heart. The Thames was a black ribbon under the gaslights, its surface reflecting the city's restless pulse. The cab deposited them a short distance from Pier 7, and Holmes insisted they approach on foot, blending into the shadows of the warehouses that loomed like silent sentinels. "Keep your revolver close, Watson," Holmes murmured as they crept along a narrow alley. "The order's men are unlikely to welcome uninvited guests." Watson nodded, his hand resting on the weapon in his pocket. The air was thick with the scent of tar and salt, the distant creak of ships mingling with the low hum of voices. Pier 7 came into view, a squat warehouse with boarded windows and a single iron door, its surface pitted with rust. Holmes paused, his eyes scanning the area. "2 men at the entrance," he whispered, "armed by the look of their posture. And a third on the roof, likely a lookout." Watson squinted into the darkness. "How do we get inside?" Holmes's lips quirked. "Diversion, my dear Watson. A classic stratagem." He produced a small vial from his coat, its contents glinting faintly. "A chemical concoction of my own design, harmless but effective. When I give the signal, be ready to move." Holmes crept closer to the warehouse, staying low. He uncorked the vial and tossed it toward a stack of crates near the entrance. A soft hiss followed, and a cloud of acrid smoke billowed upward, drawing shouts from the guards. As they rushed to investigate, Holmes signaled to Watson, and the two slipped through the iron door. which had been left ajar in the confusion. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, the air heavy with the scent of oil and metal. Gas lamps cast flickering shadows, revealing rows of scientific equipment lenses, wires, and strange devices that seemed to hum with latent energy. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he examined a crate labeled Symposium Exhibit. "The orders." "Preparations," he said softly. "This is no mere demonstration. These devices are designed to harness the meteorite's energy." Watson's gaze fell on a blueprint pinned to a crate, its lines intricate and foreboding. "Holmes, look at this. It's a schematic, some kind of energy projector." Holmes studied the blueprint, his fingers tracing the diagrams. "A weapon, Watson, or at the very least, a device capable of catastrophic disruption. The meteorite's energy is unstable, as Starling suspected, if misused." Before he could finish, a shadow loomed behind them. Watson spun, revolver raised, but Holmes's hand stayed him. A figure stepped into the light, a man in a dark cloak, his face obscured by a scarf. "You're trespassing," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Holmes's tone was calm, almost conversational. "And you, sir, are part of a conspiracy that threatens more than you realize. Step aside, and we may yet resolve this without violence." The man lunged, a blade glinting in his hand. Watson reacted instinctively, tackling him to the ground. The struggle was brief but fierce, ending with the man subdued and bound with a length of rope from a nearby crate. Holmes retrieved the blueprint, tucking it into his coat. "We must leave, Watson," he said, his voice urgent. "The others will return soon." They slipped back into the night, the blueprint a heavy weight in Holmes's pocket. The warehouse had yielded answers, but also new dangers. The Order's plan was coming into focus, and the symposium loomed as the stage for their ambition. As they vanished into the fog, Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that grew darker with each step. Chapter 8. The dockside ambush. The fog clung to the Thames like a shroud, its tendrils curling around the gaslights that flickered weakly along the dockside. The air was thick with the scent of tar, damp wood, and the faint metallic tang of the river. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved silently through the narrow alleys of Wapping, their footsteps muffled by the damp cobblestones. The coded telegram found in Professor Mortimer's study had led them here, to a derelict warehouse nestled among the skeletal cranes and rusting hulks of abandoned ships. The night was alive with the distant creak of rigging and the occasional cry of a gull, but an undercurrent of menace hung heavy, as though the shadows themselves were watching. Holmes, clad in a dark overcoat, paused at the mouth of an alley, his keen eyes scanning the warehouse ahead. Its weathered facade loomed, a hulking silhouette against the moonless sky, its windows black and uninviting. Watson, ever the steadfast companion, adjusted his grip on the revolver in his coat pocket, his breath visible in the chill air. "This is it, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low and precise. "The telegram pointed to this warehouse. Pier 7, Crate 13, midnight. The hour approaches, and I suspect we are not alone." Watson nodded, his jaw tight. "You think Mortimer was truthful about not knowing Starling's fate?" He seemed rattled, but I've seen men lie with less sweat on their brow. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Mortimer is a pawn, Watson, not the hand that moves the pieces. His confession was a half-truth, meant to deflect us. This warehouse holds answers, perhaps to Starling's whereabouts, perhaps to the broader machinations of this so-called Order of the Celestial Veil." They crept closer, keeping to the shadows. The warehouse door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning them inward. Holmes paused, tilting his head to listen. A faint clatter echoed from within, followed by the low murmur of voices. He raised a hand, signaling Watson to hold position, and edged toward the door. Peering through the gap, he saw the dim glow of lanterns illuminating stacks of crates. their surfaces marked with cryptic symbols, circles, and lines that mirrored the celestial. Engravings on the pocket watch they'd found on Dartmoor. Voices, Holmes whispered. At least 3 men, possibly more. They're handling something heavy. Listen to the strain in their tones. Watson strained his ears, catching the faint grunt of effort and the scrape of wood. Moving crates, perhaps. Or something more sinister. Precisely what we're here to discover, Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. Stay close and keep that revolver ready. We may need to act swiftly. They slipped inside, the door creaking faintly as they crossed the threshold. The interior was a cavernous maze of crates and barrels, the air thick with dust and the faint, acrid smell of chemicals. Lanterns hung from beams, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Holmes moved with the grace of a predator, his eyes darting to every detail: the scuff of a boot on the floor, a half-burned cigarette stub, a smear of grease on a crate's edge. Watson followed, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. They navigated the labyrinth of crates, guided by the intermittent sounds of movement. As they rounded a corner, Holmes froze, raising a hand. Ahead, in a cleared space, 3 men stood around a large crate, its lid pried open. One, a burly figure, with a scarred face, wielded a crowbar, while another, wiry and bespectacled, scribbled notes on a clipboard. The third, dressed in a long coat, stood apart, his posture rigid, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. "Look at this, lads," the burly man said, his voice gruff as he lifted a metallic object from the crate. It glinted in the lantern. Light, a complex apparatus of gears and wires, its surface etched with the same celestial symbols. "The boss'll be pleased. This one's ready for the symposium." The bespectacled man adjusted his glasses, his voice nasal and precise. "Careful, Higgs, that's no trinket. If the alignment's off, it could fry us all." The man in the long coat turned slightly, his voice low and commanding. "Enough chatter. Secure it and move to the next crate. We're on a schedule." Holmes leaned close to Watson, his whisper barely audible. "That device, it's no mere scientific curiosity. Those symbols match the meteorite's engravings. This is the work of the Order, preparing for their demonstration." Watson's grip tightened on his revolver. "What's the plan, Holmes?" "We can't let them move that thing." "Patience," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. "We need evidence, something tangible to connect this to the symposium and Starling's disappearance. But we must act before they disperse." He gestured toward a stack of crates to their left, offering cover. They crept forward, crouching low. Holmes's fingers brushed the edge of a crate, noting its label, Crate 13, Symposium Delivery. He nodded to Watson, who understood the significance. This was their target. As they positioned themselves behind the crates, a sudden noise, a sharp clatter, echoed through the warehouse. Watson's foot had nudged a loose board, sending a small tool skittering across the floor. The 3 men froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. "Who's there?" The burly man Higgs growled, hefting his crowbar like a weapon. The man in the long coat drew a pistol, his eyes scanning the shadows. Holmes cursed under his breath, his mind racing. "Watson, prepare yourself," he whispered. "We've lost the element of surprise." Before Watson could respond, Higgs charged toward their position, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. Holmes sprang up, his lean frame a blur as he seized a nearby rope, yanking it to topple a stack of crates. The wooden boxes crashed down, forcing Higgs to leap back, swearing loudly. "Run!" the bespectacled man shouted, scrambling toward the rear of the warehouse. The man in the long coat fired. A shot, the bullet splintering a crate near Watson's head. Watson returned fire, his revolver barking in the confined space, but the man in the coat ducked behind a barrel. Holmes darted forward, weaving through the chaos. "Watson, the crate!" he called, pointing to crate 13. "Secure it." "Watson!" lunged toward the open crate, his heart pounding as another shot rang out. He ducked, rolling behind a stack of barrels, and peered inside the crate. Nestled among straw was the device, a complex assembly of metal and glass, its core glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. He reached for it, but a heavy hand seized his collar, yanking him back. Higgs loomed over him, crowbar raised. "You're in the wrong place, mate," he snarled. Watson twisted, driving his elbow into Higgs's gut. The man grunted, stumbling, but swung the crowbar. Watson dodged, the metal grazing his shoulder, tearing his coat. He tackled Higgs, the two men crashing into a pile of crates, wood splintering around them. Holmes, meanwhile, pursued the man in the long coat, who had bolted toward a side exit. The detective's long legs closed the distance, but the man spun, firing another shot. Holmes dove behind a crate, the bullet ricocheting off a metal beam. Undeterred, he scanned the surroundings, noting a coil of rope dangling from a pulley system overhead. With a swift motion, he grabbed the rope and swung, his boots connecting with the man's chest, sending him sprawling. "Stay down," Holmes commanded, pinning the man's wrist to disarm him. But the man twisted free, scrambling to his feet, and vanishing into the shadows. Watson, grappling with Higgs, landed a solid punch, dazing the larger man. He shoved Higgs into a stack of barrels, which toppled with a deafening crash, pinning the thug beneath. Breathing heavily, Watson turned back to crate 13, only to see the bespectacled man attempting to drag the device away. "Not so fast!" Watson shouted, tackling the man. The clipboard clattered to the floor, revealing pages of schematics and notes. Watson pinned the man's arms, but the wiry figure squirmed, slipping free and bolting toward the exit. Holmes reappeared, his coat dusted with grime but his expression calm. "Let him go, Watson. We have what we need." He knelt beside the crate, examining the device. Its core pulsed faintly, the light casting eerie shadows on his angular face. "This is no ordinary machine. The meteorite's energy is integrated into its design, a power source unlike any I've seen." Watson, catching his breath, gestured to the scattered papers. "And these? Schematics, I presume?" Holmes scooped up the clipboard, his eyes scanning the diagrams. Indeed, blueprints for a device capable of harnessing the meteorite's energy. If the Order's plan succeeds, this could unleash chaos at the symposium, energy surges, perhaps even explosions. A distant shout interrupted them. More voices echoed from the warehouse's rear, reinforcements, no doubt. Holmes tucked the blueprints under his arm and lifted the device, surprisingly light despite its size. "We must leave, Watson. Now." They sprinted toward the entrance, dodging crates and leaping over debris. The fog had thickened outside, offering cover as they slipped into the alley. Behind them, shouts and footsteps grew louder, but the maze of docks swallowed their pursuers' dot as they reached a safe distance. Holmes paused, setting the device down carefully. "This confirms it, Watson. The Order plans to unveil this at the symposium, a public demonstration of their power. But why? To inspire awe or to sow destruction?" Watson wiped sweat from his brow, his shoulder aching from Higgs's blow. "And Starling? Do you think he's still alive, caught up in this?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I suspect he's closer than we think. The Order wouldn't discard a mind like his so easily. But for now, we have the blueprints and the device evidence enough to disrupt their plans." They melted into the fog, the device and blueprints secured, their minds already turning to the symposium and the looming threat of the Order's ambitions. The night was far from over, and the stars above seemed to watch, silent witnesses to the unfolding mystery. Chapter 9. The Symposium's shadow, the gaslights of London, flickered like earthbound stars as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped from their hansom cab onto the bustling cobblestones of Bloomsbury. The grand edifice of the Royal Scientific Society loomed before them, its neoclassical facade aglow with the promise of intellectual revelry. Tonight, the annual Symposium of Celestial Studies would draw the finest minds in astronomy, physics, and mathematics, along with Holmes suspected, the shadowy figures of the Order of the Celestial Veil. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of coal smoke and anticipation. As the two men adjusted their disguises, Holmes as a bespectacled German professor, his sharp features softened by a false beard, and Watson as a Scottish industrialist, his mustache waxed to a point and his gait stiffened with affected pomp. Holmes's mind was a whirl of calculations, the blueprint of the meteorite-powered device seared into his memory. The document, snatched from the dockside warehouse after their narrow escape, revealed a contraption capable of harnessing the meteorite's strange energy, a force Dr. Elias Starling's journal had described as both revolutionary and catastrophic. The device's intricate lattice of coils and crystalline conductors suggested a potential for energy surges that could, in the wrong hands, reduce the symposium hall to rubble or worse. The Order's plan, Holmes deduced, was to unveil this power publicly, a spectacle to cement their influence over the scientific elite. But the ledger, with its cryptic entries and coded names, hinted at a deeper motive, one Holmes had yet to unravel. "Keep your eyes sharp, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low and accented to match his guise. "The Order will be here, blending with the crowd. Watch for subtle cues, fidgeting hands, overly deliberate gestures, or anyone lingering near the exhibition hall." Watson nodded, his eyes scanning the throng of scholars, dignitaries, and curious onlookers streaming toward the entrance. "And the device? Do you think it's already here?" "Almost certainly," Holmes replied, adjusting his spectacles. The blueprint indicated a portable design, likely concealed within an exhibit. "We must locate it before the Order activates it tonight." They joined the crowd, passing through the grand oak doors into a cavernous hall adorned with banners depicting constellations and celestial charts. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished marble floors, where men in tailcoats and women in silk gowns mingled, their conversations a hum of theories and rivalries. The air buzzed with excitement over the symposium centerpiece, a series of lectures on recent astronomical discoveries, including a rumored presentation on unprecedented stellar phenomena. Holmes's gaze darted to the exhibition hall, a side chamber where scientific instruments and artifacts were displayed. If the device was anywhere, it would be there, masquerading as a benign invention. As they moved through the crowd, Holmes's mind sifted through the clues accumulated over the past days, the cipher in Starling's star chart, the celestial symbols. On the pocket watch, the meteorite's faint glow in the Dartmoor cave. Each pointed to the Order's obsession with a cosmic event, a rare alignment of stars that, according to Starling's journal, amplified the meteorite's properties. Tonight's symposium coincided with the alignment's peak, a fact too precise to be coincidental. The Order's demonstration, Holmes reasoned, would exploit this moment, but to what end? Power? Control? Or something more esoteric? Watson tugged at his sleeve, his voice a hushed whisper. "Holmes, over there near the orrery display, that man in the black frock coat. He's been circling the same exhibit for 10 minutes. Holmes followed Watson's gaze. The man, lean and hawkish, stood beside a gleaming brass orrery, its planets orbiting in hypnotic precision. His fingers twitched at his cufflinks, a nervous tick that belied his composed posture. Holmes noted the man's eyes darting, not to the orrery, but to the crowd, as if searching for someone, or watching for interference. "A likely candidate," Holmes said. "Let's test his mettle. Follow my lead." They approached the orrery, Holmes adopting the eager demeanor of his German persona. "Guten Abend, mein Herr," he exclaimed, clapping his hands. "This orrery, such craftsmanship. Is it Herr Kepler's design, or perhaps a modern innovation?" The man stiffened, his lips curling into a polite but strained smile. I'm no expert, sir. Merely an admirer of celestial mechanics. His voice carried a faint tremor, and his eyes flicked to a nearby doorway leading to the exhibition hall. Holmes pressed on, his tone effusive. Ah, but you must know something. The gears, the precision, surely you've studied the stars. To appreciate such a device? The man's smile faltered. I'm afraid I'm here for the lectures, not the exhibits. Excuse me. He turned abruptly, striding toward the doorway. Watson leaned close. Suspicious? Exceedingly, Holmes replied. He's no scholar, his hands lack the ink stains of a researcher, and his boots bear traces of Dartmoor mud. He's one of them. Follow him, but discreetly. I'll investigate the exhibition hall. They parted, Watson trailing the man through the crowd while Holmes slipped into the exhibition hall. The chamber was a marvel of scientific ambition. Telescopes of polished mahogany, spectroscopes glinting under glass, and star charts framed in gilt. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for anything resembling the blueprint's design. A compact device with crystalline components and coiled wiring. Near the center of the room stood a peculiar exhibit, a brass and glass apparatus labeled Stellar Energy Conduit, its description touting it as a theoretical model for capturing cosmic radiation. Holmes's pulse quickened. The device matched the blueprint specifications, down to the crystalline core at its heart. He knelt, examining the base. A faint hum emanated from within, and a subtle warmth suggested the meteorite's presence. But the device was locked, its panel secured with a complex mechanism. Holmes produced a small tool from his pocket, a custom lockpick disguised as a fountain pen, and set to work. As he probed the lock, a shadow fell across him, admiring. The conduit, Professor. A woman's voice purred, smooth as velvet but edged with menace. Holmes rose, turning to face a tall woman in a sapphire gown. Her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, betrayed a mind as keen as his own. Indeed. Madam, he said, maintaining his accent, a fascinating piece. Your work, perhaps. She smiled, a predator's grace. I'm merely a patron of the sciences, Lady Eleanor Ashford, and you are Dr. Heinrich Voss, University of Heidelberg. Holmes replied, bowing slightly. This conduit intrigues me. Its design suggests practical applications, no? Lady Eleanor's smile tightened. Purely theoretical, I'm afraid, but the symposium's lectures may enlighten you further. She gestured toward the main hall, where the crowd was gathering for the evening's first presentation. Holmes noted her guarded tone. The way her hand lingered near a brooch shaped like a crescent moon, a symbol echoed in the ledger's cryptic entries. I look forward to it, he said, excusing himself. As he rejoined the crowd, his mind raced. Lady Eleanor was no mere patron. Her presence at the exhibit, her subtle probing, marked her as a key figure in the order, but he needed proof and the device's secrets. Watson reappeared, his face flushed. Holmes, the man you pointed out, he slipped into a private room with two others. I overheard them mention the activation and midnight. They're planning something tonight. I'm sure of it. Holmes nodded, his eyes narrowing. The device is here, Watson, disguised as an exhibit. We must monitor it closely. But there's more. Lady Eleanor Ashford. She's involved, perhaps deeply. Her brooch matches a symbol in the ledger. Watson frowned. The philanthropist? She's been funding half the symposium. Precisely why she's dangerous, Holmes said. Her wealth and influence provide perfect cover. We need to observe her interactions and confirm the device's purpose before midnight. They positioned themselves near the lecture hall's entrance, where scholars debated the merits of heliocentric models and the latest spectrographic findings. The atmosphere was charged, the air thick with the scent of wax polish and intellectual fervor. Holmes's gaze swept the room, cataloging faces, gestures, and alliances. A portly man with a monocle argued loudly about planetary orbits. A young woman in spectacles sketched furiously in a notebook, and Lady Eleanor glided among the elite, her laughter a calculated melody. As the first lecture began a dry discourse on stellar parallax, Holmes and Watson slipped back to the exhibition hall. The crowd's attention was fixed on the speaker, giving them a window to investigate further. Holmes returned to the stellar energy conduit, this time noticing a faint seam along its base, barely visible to the untrained eye. He traced it with his finger, detecting a hidden panel. "Watson, keep watch," he whispered, producing his lockpick again. The panel yielded with a soft click, revealing a compartment containing a fist-sized crystal, the meteorite, its surface pulsing with an eerie green glow. Wires connected it to a series of coils, their configuration matching the blueprints. Destructive design. Watson's breath caught. "That's it, isn't it? The meteorite." Holmes nodded, his mind racing through the implications. This device could channel the meteorite's energy into a surge capable of leveling this hall. The Order plans a demonstration to awe or intimidate the scientific community. Before he could examine further, a commotion erupted nearby. A young attendant, barely out of his teens, stumbled into the hall, his face pale. "Sir, the conduit, it's not to be touched." "The exhibitor's orders." Holmes straightened, slipping back into his persona. "My apologies, young man. I was merely admiring the craftsmanship. Tell me, who oversees this exhibit?" The attendant hesitated, glancing nervously toward the main hall. "Lady Ashford's staff, sir. She's very particular about it." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. Another thread tying Lady Eleanor to the Order. "Thank you," he said, dismissing the boy. "We must act swiftly, Watson. The activation is planned for midnight, likely during the symposium's climax. We need to disable the device without drawing attention." As they returned to the lecture hall, Watson's eyes widened. "Holmes, look there, in the back row." Holmes followed, his gaze and his heart skipped a beat. Among the audience, half hidden by a pillar, sat a man with a familiar profile, sharp cheekbones, a graying beard, and eyes fixed on the speaker with a mix of fear and determination. It was Dr. Elias Starling, alive and disguised in a scholar's tweed suit, his presence a shock that upended Holmes's calculations. "Starling," Holmes breathed. "He's here, hiding in plain sight." Watson gripped his arm. "What does this mean? Has he been working with the Order all along?" "No," Holmes said, his mind racing. "His posture, his furtive glances, he's no conspirator. He's here to stop them, just as we are. But why reveal himself now?" The lecture droned on, but Holmes's focus was on Starling. The astronomer's hands clutched a small notebook, its pages worn and dog-eared. Holmes deduced it contained critical information, perhaps the key to neutralizing the meteorite's power. But approaching Starling risked exposing their own disguises, and the Order's agents were surely watching. As the lecture ended and the crowd dispersed for refreshments, Holmes made his decision. "Watson, we must speak to Starling, but cautiously. Follow my lead." They maneuvered through the crowd, Holmes adopting a jovial air as he bumped into Starling's shoulder. "Entschuldigung, mein Freund," he exclaimed, slipping a folded note into Starling's pocket. The note, written in haste, read, "Meet us at the orrery, 11 p.m. You are not alone." Starling's eyes widened briefly, but he nodded, his expression unreadable. Holmes and Watson withdrew, blending back into the crowd. The clock was ticking toward midnight, and the symposium's shadow grew darker with each passing minute. The next hour was a tense dance of observation and subterfuge. Holmes watched Lady Eleanor charm a group of professors, her every gesture calculated to deflect suspicion. Watson trailed the hawkish man, who conferred with two others in hushed tones near a display of lunar maps. The air grew heavy with the weight of impending action, the chandelier's light casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with intent. At 11 p.m., Holmes and Watson positioned themselves by the orrery, its planets spinning in silent mockery of the chaos brewing below. Starling appeared, his disguise intact but his eyes haunted. He glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Holmes, I presume? I saw through your disguise the moment you approached." Holmes shed his accent, his voice crisp. "Dr. Starling, your presence here complicates matters. Why did you fake your disappearance?" Starling's jaw tightened. "The Order, they threatened to kill me unless I helped them harness the meteorite's energy. I discovered its potential in Dartmoor, a power that could revolutionize energy production but destroy entire cities if misused. I fled to sabotage their plans, but they're too close to succeeding." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The device in the exhibition hall. You know how to disable it?" Starling nodded, producing his notebook. "The meteorite's energy is unstable, but I've calculated a way to neutralize it, a precise adjustment to the device's coils. But we must act before midnight, or the Order will trigger a surge that could kill everyone here." Watson's face hardened. "And Lady Eleanor? Is she their leader?" "She's a key player," Starling said. "Her wealth funds the Order, and her influence shields them. But there's another, a figure they call the Star Warden. I've never seen them, but they pull the strings." Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Lady Eleanor, the meteorite, the device, the Star Warden, all threads in a tapestry of ambition and peril. "We have less than an hour," he said. "Dr. Starling, you'll guide us to the device. Watson, keep watch for the Order's agents. We move now." As they slipped back into the exhibition hall, the symposium's din faded, replaced by the hum of the meteorite's power. The stellar energy conduit stood like a sentinel, its crystal core pulsing faster now, as if sensing the approaching alignment. Holmes's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase, the moment when every clue converged. Starling knelt beside the device, his hands trembling as he opened his notebook. The coils must be realigned to disrupt the energy flow. Its delicate work, one mistake, and the surge could trigger prematurely. Holmes nodded, his lockpick ready to access the device's innards. Watson stood guard, his hand on the revolver hidden beneath his coat. The hall was quiet, but the shadows seemed to shift, as if the Order's eyes were everywhere. As Starling began his adjustments, a soft click echoed from the doorway. Holmes's head snapped up, his senses alert. The hawkish man stood there, flanked by two others, their faces grim. "Step away from the conduit," he growled. Drawing a pistol, Holmes's mind calculated their odds. 3 armed men, a crowded hall nearby, and a device on the brink of catastrophe. He raised his hands, feigning surrender, but his eyes locked. With Watson's, signaling a plan. "Gentlemen," Holmes said, his voice calm, "you're too late. The device is already disabled," the hawkish man sneered. "You're bluffing, Professor. The Star Warden will have your head for this." Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then let the standoff lasted only a moment." Watson, seizing the distraction, lunged forward, tackling one of the men. A shot rang out, grazing the wall, and chaos erupted. Holmes dove for the device, shielding Starling as he worked. The astronomer's hands moved with desperate precision, realigning the coils as shouts and footsteps echoed through the hall. "Done!" Starling hissed, slamming the panel shut. The crystal's glow dimmed, the hum fading to silence. Holmes grabbed Starling's arm, pulling him toward a side exit. "Go. We'll hold them off." Watson grappled with the second man, disarming him with a well-placed punch. The third man fired again, but Holmes was already moving, his cane a blur as it struck the man's wrist. The pistol clattered to the floor, and Watson's boot ensured the man stayed down. They fled into the night, the symposium's lights fading behind them. The device was inert, the meteorite's power neutralized for now. But the Order remained. and Lady Elena's shadow loomed large. As they vanished into the fog, Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next move in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the stars themselves. Chapter 10. The Astronomer's Return. The fog clung to London streets like a conspirator's cloak, swirling around gaslights and muffling the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood in the shadowed alcove of the grand symposium hall, their breaths visible in the chill night air. The hall, a monolithic structure of marble and glass, loomed before them, its arched windows glowing with the warm light of chandeliers. Inside, the scientific elite of London mingled, their voices a distant hum, oblivious to the danger pulsing beneath their feet. A device powered by a meteorite of unimaginable energy, poised to unleash chaos if the Order of the Celestial Veil succeeded. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the crowd through a window, his mind a whirl of calculations. "Starling is here," he murmured, his voice low but certain. "Alive, disguised, and hiding among the symposium's attendees. I saw the telltale limp in his gait, a slight favoring of the left leg, from an old injury he mentioned in his journal. He's in the East Wing, near the lecture hall." Watson, his overcoat damp from the fog, adjusted his grip on his revolver, concealed beneath the folds. "How can you be sure it's him, Holmes? The man's been missing for weeks. He could be halfway to the Americas by now." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "The stars, Watson. They betray him. His posture, the way he tilts his head to study the ceiling's constellation fresco. It's the same habit he described when charting the Pleiades in his notes. No, he's here, and he's watching. The question is why he's hiding, and what he intends to do." The revelation had come moments earlier, during their covert surveillance of the symposium. Holmes had spotted a figure in a poorly tailored frock coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, lingering at the edge of the crowd. The man's movements were too deliberate, his glances too calculated, and when he paused to adjust his spectacles, Holmes had caught the glint of a familiar silver chain, a pocket watch engraved with celestial symbols, identical to the one dropped by the cloaked figure on Dartmoor. "We must approach him carefully," Holmes continued, his eyes narrowing. "Starling is no fool. If he's faked his disappearance, he has a purpose. He may be our ally or our greatest obstacle." Watson nodded, his jaw set. "What's the plan, then?" "We can't exactly stroll in and tap him on the shoulder. The place is crawling with society members." Holmes's gaze flicked to the side entrance, where a delivery cart stood unattended, its driver distracted by a street vendor's call. "We enter through the service door, blend with the staff. Starling will reveal himself if we corner him subtly. Follow my lead." They moved swiftly, slipping through the fog to the cart. Holmes, with the dexterity of a pickpocket, lifted a pair of aprons from the cart's back, tossing one to Watson. "Put this on, you're a waiter now. Keep your head down and your ears open." Watson grumbled but complied, tying the apron over his coat. "I hope you know what you're doing, Holmes. If we're caught, Lestrade won't be here to bail. U.S. out." "Lestrade's men are too busy chasing phantoms at the docks," Holmes replied, already striding toward the service entrance. "We're on our own." Inside, the symposium hall buzzed with activity. Scientists in tailcoats and ladies in silk gowns mingled in the grand atrium, their conversations a tapestry of theories on thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and the latest Martian canal debates. Waiters wove through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne flutes, while a string quartet played a soft Mendelssohn piece in the corner. Holmes and Watson, disguised as staff, moved with practiced ease, their trays shielding their faces as they scanned for Starling. Holmes's eyes darted to the East Wing's entrance, where a lecture hall sign announced a talk on celestial mechanics and unseen forces. "There," he whispered, nodding toward a figure slipping through the crowd. The man's hat was pulled low, but his limp was unmistakable. "He's heading for the lecture hall." Move quickly, but don't draw. Attention. They navigated the throng, dodging a portly professor expounding on cometary orbits and a lady who nearly spilled her champagne on Watson's apron. The lecture hall was dimly lit, its rows of chairs half filled with attendees listening to a droning speaker discuss Kepler's laws. Starling, if it was him, stood at the back, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room like a hunted animal. Holmes gestured for Watson to flank the opposite side, creating a subtle pincer. As they closed in, Starling's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto Holmes. For a moment, their eyes met Holmes's piercing and unyielding, Starling's wide with recognition and fear. Then, with a deft movement, Starling bolted toward a side door, after him. Holmes hissed, abandoning his tray on a nearby table. Watson followed, shoving past a startled usher. The side door led to a narrow corridor lined with portraits of astronomers, Galileo, Newton, Herschel, each staring down as if judging their pursuit. Starling was fast despite his limp, his coat flapping as he rounded a corner. Holmes, with his long strides, gained ground, while Watson panted behind, cursing the fog's dampness in his lungs. The corridor ended at a heavy oak door, slightly ajar. Holmes slowed, signaling Watson to stay back. He peered through the crack, his silhouette sharp against the flickering gaslight within. The room beyond was a private study, its walls lined with books and star charts. Starling stood at a desk, frantically stuffing papers into a satchel. Athene. Single candle cast long shadows, illuminating a telescope in the corner, its lens pointed at a high window. Holmes stepped inside, his voice calm but commanding. "Dr. Starling, I presume." Starling froze, his hand on a leather-bound journal. His face, now visible without the hat, was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Holmes," he said, his voice a mix of relief and wariness. "I should have known you'd find me." Watson entered, revolver drawn but lowered. "You've got some explaining to do, Starling. Why the disappearing act? And what's this about a meteorite?" Starling's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair. "I had no choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Order of the Celestial Veil, they're not just fanatics. They're dangerous. They want to harness the meteorites. Energy, not for science, but for power. I discovered their plan and I couldn't let them succeed." Holmes leaned against the desk, his fingers brushing the journal's edge. "So you faked your disappearance. Left the note, the cipher, the map all to lead us to the truth while you worked in the shadows." Starling nodded, his eyes flicking. "To the telescope. The meteorite is extraordinary, Holmes. Its energy defies everything we know about physics. It could light cities, power machines beyond imagination, but it's unstable. One miscalculation, and it could level half of London. The Order plans to demonstrate it at this symposium, to awe the world and secure their influence. I fled too." "Stop them," Watson frowned, holstering his revolver. "Why not go to the police, or come to us directly?" Starling's laugh was bitter. "The police? Half the Order's members are in high places, politicians, scientists, even philanthropists. As for you, I wasn't sure who I could trust. The Order has eyes everywhere. I had to stay hidden, gather proof, and sabotage their device before it's too late." Holmes picked up the journal, flipping through pages filled with equations, sketches of the meteorite, and notes on its properties. "This energy you describe, it's electromagnetic, with a unique frequency, yes? Capable of resonating with certain metals?" Starling's eyes widened. "How did you?" "Your notes in the cave mentioned a resonance effect," Holmes said, tapping the journal. "And the blueprint we found at the warehouse confirms it. The device is designed to amplify that resonance, creating a cascade. But you already knew that, didn't you?" Starling nodded, his voice steadying. "I've been working on a countermeasure, a way to disrupt the resonance. But I need access to the device, and it's heavily guarded in the symposium's lower vaults." Watson glanced at Holmes. Can we trust him, Holmes? He's been playing a dangerous game. Holmes studied Starling, his gaze dissecting every twitch, every bead of sweat. He's telling the truth, Watson. His fear is genuine, and his knowledge is our best weapon. But we must act quickly. The Order's demonstration is tonight, and they'll be watching for us. Starling stood, his limp more pronounced in his agitation. I'll help you. I know the device's weakness is specific components that, if removed, will render it inoperative. But we'll need to get past the guards and the Society's inner circle. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the challenge. Then, we have an alliance, Dr. Starling. Tell me everything you know about the device's location and the guards' patterns. Watson, check the corridor. We can't afford interruptions. As Watson moved to the door, Starling began sketching a rough map of the symposium's lower vaults, his hand trembling slightly. The device is in a reinforced chamber, accessible only through a hidden stairwell behind the main lecture hall. There are 4 guards, armed, and a mechanical lock with a combination I haven't cracked. Holmes examined the sketch, his mind already mapping their approach. A mechanical lock is child's play. The guards, however, will require finesse. Watson, your revolver may yet see use, but only as a last resort. Watson returned, nodding. Corridor's clear, but I heard footsteps approaching from the west. We need to move. Starling hesitated, his eyes darting to the telescope. There's one more thing. The meteorite, it's not just a power source. It communicates, in a way. I've recorded strange pulses, almost like signals when it's exposed to starlight. I don't know what it means, but the Order believes it's a message from the cosmos. Holmes's brow furrowed, a rare flicker of intrigue crossing his face. Fascinating, but for now, we focus on the device. Lead the way, Starling. They slipped out of the study, moving through the symposium's labyrinthine corridors. The air grew colder as they descended a service stairwell, the hum of the crowd fading above them. Starling's limp slowed their pace, but his determination matched Holmes's own. At the base of the stairs, a heavy iron door loomed, its lock a complex array of gears and tumblers. Holmes knelt, producing a set of lockpicks from his coat. Keep watch, he instructed, his fingers moving with surgical precision. The lock clicked after a tense minute, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. Inside, the device stood a towering apparatus of brass and glass, the meteorite glowing faintly at its core, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Starling pointed to a series of coils at the device's base. Those are the resonance amplifiers. Remove them, and the device can't function. Holmes nodded, already prying open a panel. But before he could proceed, a sharp voice cut through the silence. Step away, Mr. Holmes. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in a crimson gown, her face obscured by a veil. 2 armed men flanked her, their revolvers trained on the trio. Lady Eleanor, Holmes said, his voice calm but edged with steel. I suspected you'd be here. Starling gasped, his face paling. She's the Order's leader. She's been behind it all. Lady Eleanor's laugh was cold, her veil lifting to reveal sharp, calculating eyes. You've been a nuisance, Holmes. And you, Starling, were a fool to betray us. The meteorite's power will reshape the world, and you won't stop it. Watson's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Holmes's subtle gesture stopped him. You're too late, Lady Eleanor, Holmes said, his voice ablade. The device is already compromised. Check the coils. Her eyes narrowed, and she gestured to one of the guards. As he approached the device, Holmes moved with lightning speed, hurling a vial from his pocket. It shattered, releasing a cloud of choking smoke. Chaos erupted. Watson tackled the second guard. Starling ducked behind the device, and Holmes lunged for Lady Eleanor, who vanished into the haze. Watson, the coils! Holmes shouted, grappling with the first guard. Watson! scrambled to the device, yanking out the brass components with a grunt. Sparks flew, and the meteorite's glow flickered, then dimmed. Starling emerged, coughing. It's done. The device is useless now, but the victory was short-lived. Lady Eleanor's voice echoed from the chamber's entrance. This isn't. Over Holmes, the order will rise again. Her footsteps faded, and the guards, disoriented, fled after her. Holmes, Watson, and Starling stood amidst the smoke, the device inert before them. She's right, Holmes said grimly. This is only a respite. The Order's network is vast and Lady Eleanor is cunning. Starling clutched his journal, his face resolute. Then we keep fighting. The meteorite must be studied, not weaponized. I'll work with you, Holmes, to ensure it. Holmes nodded, a rare glint of respect in his eyes. Very well, Starling. Our alliance holds for now. Watson, let's get out before the guards regroup. They ascended the stairs, the symposium's lights fading behind them. The fog outside had thickened, but Holmes's mind was clear. The meteorite's secrets, Starling's survival, and Lady Eleanor's escape formed a constellation of challenges yet to be solved. As they vanished into the London night, Holmes glanced at the stars above, their silent patterns a reminder that some mysteries burned brighter than others.